Revolution Radio, freedoms.com, the number one listener-supported radio station on the planet. Revolution Radio. Revolution Radio, freedoms.com, the number one listener-supported radio station on the planet.
And Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, and there were giants in earth when they were, and also after that, and also chapter and Genesis chapter 6, verse 4, and there were giants in earth when they were, and also after that,
every Sunday, 10 p.m. till midnight Eastern Standard Time on Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Check it out. Steve Robbins. Every Sunday, 10 p.m. till midnight
We did not
Eastern
engage
Standard
in
Time
conflict
on
that was out
Revolution
of line
Radio
with
at
mission.
freedomslips.com. Check it out. Steve Robbins.
I will never send troops anywhere on a mission of that kind without telling them that if somebody shoots at them, they can start to shoot back.
At freedomslips.com. Check it out.
I will never send troops anywhere on a mission of that kind without telling them that if somebody shoots at them, they can start to shoot back.
At freedomslips.com.
I will never send troops anywhere on a mission of that kind without telling them that if somebody shoots at them, they can start to shoot back.
Hi, I'm Scott McCarthy. I am your host on Revolution Radio, where every Monday from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern, we bring you the latest in this ensuing takedown of this global criminal empire.
That's an image of strength.
You'll get the raw, hard truth here on The Tipping Point. So come join us Mondays, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern in Studio B at revolution.radio.
All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And yeah, we're going to get back to your host.
Hey, welcome to Celebrate Truth Radio. I'm your host, Robbie Davidson. This is episode 74. And my guest tonight is MIA at this point. So hopefully he's going to show up soon because I'm really excited about this show. So maybe I'm just going to have to take some questions, maybe from the chat. We'll have to do something because we're sitting here waiting. This is a first, but trust me, it will be worth the wait. Like I said before on my social media posts, that VenomFangX, you're probably thinking, who? What kind of name is that? Well, hopefully you're going to find out tonight. But I started watching him in 2007, and he was a huge influence in my life as far as apologetics and just everything that he brought to the table early on YouTube. So anyways, welcome everyone to the show. It's Apologetics, Debate, and Faith with VenomFangX. But like I said, VenomFangX is MIA at this point. So I'm trying to get a hold of him. Hopefully he'll come. Maybe he's going to be fashionably late. But anyways, we'll see what happens. We'll try to get a hold of him. And if in the meantime, something else happens, we'll go from there. But anyways, hopefully everyone's having a great weekend. Happy Sabbath to everyone that's taken care of. Obviously, the sun is setting in different places, wherever you are. But anyways, it's been an amazing time. What a year, 2020. I mean, there's just so much to talk about. And while I don't want to get into all the specifics, I can just say that there's a lot of transitional things that are taking place this year. And I know a lot of people are filled with anxiety and fear and even anticipation of what's coming next. But there's no doubt this is the time that we really need to be clinging closer and closer to the Most High. We need to honestly be looking to Jesus. He is the truth. He is the way, the truth, and the life. And that's all about Celebrate Truth. It's celebrating Jesus, celebrating the Messiah, understanding what he did for us and what he provided. It's incredible time. So anyways, welcome to everyone who's listening on Revolution Radio. It is a listener-supported network. Please donate if you can and help out. You get access to all the different shows, archives, and so much more. It's such a great thing to have platforms like this because, I don't know, what do you guys think? YouTube? The censorship is out of control. I mean, seriously, so crazy what's going on with YouTube, with social media, with just so much happening. So we're just gonna praise God based on having these platforms available at the time. And honestly, if it's His will, they will continue on, and we will be able to get His message across the world. Getting the gospel is the most important thing that we can do. The Great Commission, right? And in these times of uncertainty, and that we're all facing, we really need to understand that people need to know the truth, and they need to know the most important truth, which is Jesus. They need to understand that they need that relationship. They need to surrender their life. And some incredible things happened during the week. Some friends have been praying for, also one in particular, very long time. Finally, someone had actually surrendered their life, and it had been a long struggle, but finally they actually did surrender their life to Jesus. And praise God, praise God. It actually says in the Bible that when that happens, there actually is a party in heaven. The angels rejoice. I remember when I got saved at the age of 21, I remember someone came up to me and said, "Do you know that the angels had a party?" I'm like, "What?" They're like, "Yeah, the angels actually party. They actually have a celebration." It's true. I mean, the Bible does speak about what a rejoicing time for someone to come back to God. It's like the prodigal son, coming back. And it's just an amazing time seeing so many people, listening to the gospel, hearing, His word being proclaimed. And that's what's going on. There's protests going on. There's BLM marches. There's all this stuff going on. But it's like, this is the time to get out there and proclaim the gospel. It's time to go out there and boldly proclaim. I mean, we are ambassadors for Him. Do you understand exactly how much, not just power, but how protected you are in that environment? That if nothing is willed, nothing is going to happen. I mean, we are called, as the church. And I think it's really important that we understand that as the church, that we have to continue moving forward, regardless how grim, how dark things get. I mean, there have been some serious dark times in history. I mean, everyone can understand that there's been some pretty horrific times, and maybe we're headed towards a time that's going to be very different for a lot of us. And, now's the time to really pray and say, hey, what is it you're calling of us, God? What is it you want us to do? And I think that's really important, really super important. But anyways, welcome everyone also on YouTube that are tuning in on Celebrate Truth. That's how you get to my channel on YouTube. Been going now for over 5 years. Hard to believe, 5 years. Started in 2015, actually, of August. It was August 19th, 2015. So we're coming on the 5-year mark here in August. But August is right around the corner. I don't know about you, but has this year been going slow or has it been going fast? For me, it's kind of like watching a train wreck slow motion, but also it's been going very quickly. I have a hard time explaining it. Even though sometimes it seems like it's going slow, it's flying by. I mean, we're already in August almost. I mean, another week and a half and we're going to be in August. So I am pretty amazed at just how fast things are progressing and leading up to the elections in the United States. It's going to be a crazy period. I think that a lot of stuff is going to transpire. And the question is, what are His people called to do in these times? It's very, very important. And I know that, my guest tonight, if he does show up, and I'm not sure what the holdup is, but anyways, we'll see what happens. But he's been very passionate, not just about sharing the gospel, but also witnessing to all sorts of religions, all sorts of people. I mean, back in the day, he would be witnessing to Muslims and Mormons and Satanists and witches and you name it. Just an incredible time, and that really gave me a lot of inspiration moving forward about, apologetics is pretty much the defense of the Christian faith. I mean, when you're talking, that type of apologetics, but really it's having a defense ready to have that answer if people ask that question. I think it's really important that we are armed, that we speak the truth in love, but nonetheless, we speak the truth. People definitely need to hear it. And whether they come to understand a lot of truths in this world, but they don't understand the most embodiment of truth, which is Jesus, they're missing the boat. I mean, they really are, in big trouble if they don't have that all together. So to me, that's a huge thing with me, is my heart and my intention is everything that I do, it has to be done for His glory. It has to be done for His kingdom. And really, if you think about it, that's exactly what we're doing. We're kingdom building. That we're working for Him. We're strangers in this land. I mean, all these things that is told. That's why we're supposed to be a peculiar people. We're not supposed to be of this world. We're in the world, but not of the world. So But I'll tell you, it's amazing when you start, talking to different people and really getting down to, what is the gospel and what is it to communicate and to get that out to people. But anyways, welcome to everyone in the chat in YouTube. We've got a lot of people. Thank you so much for all the mods doing excellent work. Running the 24/7 that I run, Flat Earth in the Bible, runs pretty much around the clock for the most part, other than when the live radio show happens. I take it down for a couple hours and then it resumes right after this radio broadcast. But that does run 24/7, and really appreciate the mods in there. I don't know how long that's been. I think I've had that up running now for two years. It might be close to 2 years now that's been running for, but really appreciate the mods and everyone that's come and been supportive and just prayed for me and my family and just this ministry, because like I said, it's definitely come under attack. I've been demonetized for it's been well over a year now, maybe a year and a half, and I just gave up. I just said I'm not going to bother, just rather than alter for what they want to be accessible. I'm just like, you know what, I just want to say the truth. I'm not going to worry about being monetized, but really do appreciate my Patreons supporting me there at patreon.com/celebrate truth. Really appreciate that. Become a patron, and it is really appreciated. Also, I haven't been doing much as far as documentaries, taking a little bit of a break from that for, I don't know, I guess until God calls me back. But I did put out quite a few on my channel, Celebrate Truth. You can check those out. Most notably, The Global Lie, Scientism Exposed, and Scientism Exposed 2. So you can get all those for free, but I also do sell the digital download and also the DVD. But again, you can try before you buy if you want that. But it's a good way sometimes to get that information to someone, just by having a DVD sitting on their coffee table. And that's primarily, a lot of people have used that as a tool. And I'd say that Scientism Exposed is a great tool to reach people, and especially with the most powerful thing above all, the gospel that's presented at the end of both Scientism Exposed and Scientism Exposed 2. But anyways, thank you so much, everyone joining in, and maybe I'll maybe call someone up and get someone in if my guest doesn't show. This is a first. This is episode 74. And this has never happened. So you guys are witnessing a first, but there's always exclusives on Celebrate Truth Radio. But how you doing there? Take on the World TV is in. Maybe he wants to come in and talk about some stuff. Roderick is there. Nice to see you. And really appreciate everyone and everyone's support. Like I said, I'm sitting here waiting to see if he will show up. And it was all set up, today. Got the feedback, got the time, everything's fine. So hopefully he's okay. Hopefully nothing bad has happened. He's had a lot of crazy stuff happen, over the last 15, 16 years, especially with his channel, especially with death threats, not just to him, to his family, and a lot of stuff. And he was going to go and explain all of that. And I don't want to go into too much detail because I'd love for him to explain it. But like I said, going back to 2007 is when I started watching him. And just phenomenal. This guy is a force, and he was very creative at putting videos together. He did a video series, and eventually, it got taken down. This is one of the reasons he got so many death threats. Is I think the title of the video was "Allah is Satan," and he did this very creative video. I'm not sure if anyone in the chat remembers it. Like I said, we're going a bit old school here, but what an incredible video it was. He pretty much broke down the whole thing, and he reenacted it. He actually did the character of Allah or Satan talking to Mohammad, and he had it's hard to explain, but he did it with theatrics. And that was the thing. It wasn't he was just talking about stuff. He would actually put on full presentations. And back in 2007, it was really rare to see full enacted plays or, this type of elaborate, so he had a very creative way of putting stuff together. But yeah, that got him in a lot of trouble. But it was bang on. And he kind of showed how Allah and Satan, a lot of the stuff, was definitely paralleling. And it was interesting. He basically put that out there. And there were a lot of Muslims that really didn't like it. I wonder why. But again, knowing his heart, he wasn't trying to, offend people that way. He just was trying to get the truth out there and saying, hey, look, this is what's going on, and let's dig through and see what happens here with the truth. But Anyways, Race Chaser, good to see you. Got Stevie6621 in the chat. And we've got all sorts of people joining. Really appreciate you guys coming along. This is a interesting one for me. No guests, so I might just have to ring someone up and say, hey, let's talk for a bit. And then maybe we can get things going. But I'm not sure who we can... I'm going to try one person here and see if he wants to get talking. Let's see here. He might not be around, but you know what? We will try and see. Because it never hurts to try and see what's going on here with some of the previous guests I've had on. But this one definitely has been on quite a few times. No stranger to Celebrate Truth Radio. And let's see here. Let's just see if we can get him on here. Let's not do this one. All right. All right, sorry about that. Just kind of playing around with the things here, just seeing what happens. But yeah, it's not... really apologize. I'm kind of trying to get someone on just so we can have a little bit of a chat. I wasn't really ready to do a solo show, but I am still waiting. Maybe he got the time mixed up. Not sure what's going on, but anyways, you guys are all waiting patiently and seeing what's going on rather than just kind of wait. I thought I would start the show and see if that happens. But anyways, let's see who's in the chat here. We got Chris, Take on the World TV. You're on Skype, brother? Answer Skype. I'm giving you a shout right now if you want to join. I know you want to. I know you want to. Let's see who else is in here. We got Matthew. We got Neil. How's it going, man? Got Brian. All right, let's see. What I'll probably do is maybe just take some questions. And that's a good question, CV6621. Where is VFX? I don't know. Like I said, I just was talking to him this afternoon. Everything was planned, and now it's just gone quiet. So I'm not... your guess is mine at this point. Like I said, this has never happened. I made sure that we followed up. Made sure everything was good, but no. Maybe he thinks it's next Saturday. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what's going on, but let's just see what we got here. Maybe he'll just pop in. Like I said, it will be worth the wait. And in the meantime, we can have some fun here, you know, maybe answering some questions. And yeah. Bolt Gun, nice to see you. Thanks for coming. All right, let's see what we got here. I'm just trying to look through the chat. And yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, what's on everyone's heart? What's going on? Any things that you specifically want to talk about? If it's something I feel that it's important to talk about, we can definitely talk about it. We can get through that. But yeah, nice to see you as well. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, got more people joining here. And everyone's like, why is Robbie talking and VFX isn't? Because VFX is MIA. So I think that's what we're going to call. I'm going to change the title real soon to VFX is MIA. So he's missing in action. We don't know where he is. And it's very strange. Very strange. Maybe this will be the shortest Celebrate Truth radio show. Not sure, but let's see what else we got here. I'm sure there's lots to talk about. I don't know if everyone was watching. I was tuning in to some of the riots that are going on there in Portland. And, oh my goodness, it's vicious. I mean, you hear the news and like peaceful protesters. And they just want the feds out of their city because they don't want to be occupied. It was just a peaceful protest when someone just got snatched up. And it's like, you watch these live streams, you actually watch it for hours, and it's nothing but peaceful. There's nothing close to being peaceful. I mean, it is absolutely insane what's going on. And then there's stuff going on in Vegas, and it's just getting worse and worse. And I think that it's going to continually progress towards the election, unfortunately, and it won't stop after the election. So regardless of the whole mask dilemma and the whole coronavirus thing, we're just talking about just the unrest and pushing the Marxist and the communist ideals. To me, that's a horrifying thought. It really is, you know, seeing kind of just how extreme it's got and how many people are behind it. I mean, it's one thing having groups of people, you know, chanting things. It's another thing when mayors and governors and they're like, yeah, we approve. Let's get rid of the police. And you're kind of like, what? Are we living in the Twilight Zone? Like what? And again, it's like state by state. And that's the interesting thing is you're seeing all these things take place. But we are getting closer. I mean, like I mentioned, we're going into August. here in a week or so, and yeah, we're coming up on it. And I think 2020, I mean, just all around is going to be one of the most transitional, pivotal years, I mean, in our lifetime. I don't think anyone can debate that anymore. There's just so much going on, and it's pretty incredible what's happening. So let's see here. What do we got? Going through. Yeah, VFX is late. I don't know. Maybe he's thinking that is going to be the next hour. Like I said, I checked up on him. Everything was fine this afternoon. Told him the time. Everything was good. Talked to him during the week. Everything's fine. So I don't know, man. I mean, hopefully he's okay. Something obviously has happened because, like I said, everything was set up and I confirmed it. And now, where is he? Nobody knows. And Stuart's in here. Any news on the flat Earth truth? Well, no, there's no real news per se. I mean, it's still flat. It's still not a spinning ball flying through space. That's really what's going on. Brian's asking, do you think Space Force will reveal the truth concerning the heavens? No, because I think Space Force is just a joke. I mean, I don't think there's anything to it. I think, if anything, it was to create the excitement for space. Trump building another arm of the military. I mean, here's the thing, guys. A lot of people are like, do you think Trump knows, or do you think I really don't think that like many people really do know the truth. I mean, even when you get into astronauts, I mean, I personally believe that they say about 500 people, quote unquote, have been to space, just over 500. It's too many people that like one person would leak it, right? So I'm starting to think that possibly it was like an MK Ultra. Maybe they've been hypnotized. Maybe they truly believe they have been to space. I mean, I really don't know the answer to that, but you got to remember that no president's been to space. I mean, they don't know. I don't think that, it's not like the whole world's in on it. It's like many people are just oblivious to it. The lower amount of people that know about something, the easier it can be kept a secret or kept, the more people you include on something, one person's just going to tell someone and that person's going to tell someone and away you go. People say, well, maybe they put them in fear and, do all these things. But no, I just think that a lot of people don't know. And I really don't know about the whole Space Force thing, but I really don't think that they're going to do much at all, if anything. I mean, have you seen the Space Force up in space yet? Have they been blasted up there? It's all kind of conjecture at this point. It's like we're building, and the question is why? Why are they building that arm of the military? The Army and the Navy and then Space Force. It's like, I think, to tell you the truth, I think Trump wants to kind of be remembered for certain things. It's kind of like, the first president that basically got a man on the moon. And it's like Trump, that's why he was so desperate to get people to land on the moon again. And NASA kept telling him like, no. And then Trump was like, well, what if I gave you the whole budget? Like if I gave you unlimited amount of budget, can you get there, by the end of my term? And they're kind of like, no. So I'm sure Trump is kind of scratching his head and going, wait a minute, I give him all the money in the world and they still can't go to the moon. But he's wanted these things. So I think Space Force was something that he could just kind of implement. And it will always be remembered in history, regardless where you stand on Trump. It will always be remembered that Space Force was created by President Trump. So he's got something to do with space. If he can't get a moon landing and he can't get a Mars landing, at least he gets the creation of a Space Force. So I think it's more to do with that than anything. So Gail, I really appreciate it. Thanks. That I'm glad that you're enjoying it. Welcome, Gail. Yeah. So that's the whole thing is when it comes to this whole Space Force thing, I think it looks good for your resume. I mean, think about it. You're president. It's like the more things you get done, and especially space, you can tell that Trump's kind of fascinated. And who isn't? I mean, we were all fascinated by space. It's cool, right? Oh, think about it. If you could be the one that was responsible for getting them, back to the moon or getting them to Mars or any of these things. But because NASA's like, yeah, we can't do any of that. It's like, it's 2020. You went there in 1972 and in the 60s and 70s. It's like, what? Well, why can't you? So I'm sure, he's a busy guy, but I'm sure in the back of his head, he's just like, well, if they can't do that, I want to do something for myself. So he's kind of like, let's create Space Force. And it just sounds cool. And I think it gets a lot more people excited to join the military, to tell you the truth. So that's where I stand on that. So Roderick says, I perceive the position Trump is in as he sees the lies is do you destroy the whole body at the same time destroying the cancers. Yeah, like I said, it's a whole mess, like what's going on when it comes to all these things, for sure. I mean, there's just so much so much coming. And again, you have to look at both scenarios. And I mean, I've said this before. I mean, I called Trump way back in the primaries when there was like 12 people standing up on stage. And I remember, because before my dad passed away, he was talking about, you know, how proud he was, or almost surprised he was, when he was telling his friends. He's like, my son called Trump, like when everyone was laughing about it. And really, you know, when I called Trump, everyone was laughing. And I'm not saying I was so special. I just, for some reason, had this like feeling, you know, like I'm just like, I don't know, Trump. I think Trump's going to do it. Quite honestly, when he did it, I was surprised, because by that time it had, you know, got to the point where I'm like, kind of still think so, but I don't know, just not looking good. But it was an amazing time. This time around, though, I'm not so convinced. I mean, I definitely would love him to win. I tell people all the time not to get political, but you kind of know what you're going to get with Trump. Do you really want to take a chance on like BLM and Antifa running the White House? I mean, I think it's a no-brainer. I mean, there's people that are reaching out to me that have never voted ever before, you know, the whole right, left, you know, whatever, the same puppets, blah, blah, blah. But they're like, this year I'm voting. I'm like, well, why is that? And they're like, because I know exactly what I'm going to get with Trump, right? The whole horrifying notion of basically not doing something, you know, and again, you can get into the whole rig thing. Maybe it'll be rigged or whatever, but whatever, which way you look at it, there's going to be mayhem. Trump wins. They're going to start burning cities. They're going to riot. They're going to go absolutely crazy. If you think it's crazy now, see what happens when Trump wins. And then if Trump loses, you're talking about an escalation of a transformation that I don't think we've ever witnessed in the history of, you know, I mean, it's going to be radical, man. I mean, U.S. within an 8-year period, and yes, I'm saying 8 years because usually that's the way that these things go. They flip-flop back and forth. But let's just say even 4 years. In 4 years' time, think about if BLM and Antifa and all these groups have the ear. And again, it's not Biden you got to worry about. It's his VP. Whatever woman he chooses, that's the woman to watch. That's the woman that they will be grooming to basically take charge, whether or not he steps down or not. But I still think that there's going to be some sort of medical thing, and Joe's got to step down, so the vice president's got to take over. This is if he wins. And I'm not saying, I'm just looking at both sides, because we could go either way here. And there's nothing ever certain. People say, no, you know, it's for sure Trump's going to win. It's like, well, you know what? I hope, really hope I'm wrong on this if I'm saying that there's a possibility that he might not win. But I still think it's important for us to look at both ways. What happens if he does? What happens if he doesn't? Because I just think it's absolutely horrifying what's coming. And I definitely think that we really need to be on our knees. We need to really be praying. And especially in a time like that. And I'll say this one thing. If Trump loses, and again, regardless of whether it's been rigged or whatever, if it just goes down that way and he steps down, all of a sudden they start railroading and moving towards it. At that point, there is no doubt in my mind, and it shouldn't be with anyone else, that God's judgment truly is on America. I mean, I still believe God's judgment has come to the whole world, every nation. And I look at it more of a shaking, more of a waking. You know, it's not like a wrathful judgment. It's more like shaking the nations. I've said this for many shows, and I've got a lot of flack for it. But if he loses, there's no doubt in my mind that America is going to go through a very severe judgment. And quite honestly, if you start looking in the Bible, this is what happens. He allows their enemies to take over for a time. Not forever. And again, that's the whole thing. It's not forever. But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting or whatever. But welcome to the show, Neil. Good to see you, Godsman, for 144,000. We got more people like joining, and we're still waiting for VFX MIA. That's going to be the abbreviation. And I don't know. I don't think he's going to be showing up tonight. And this, like I said, this is definitely a first. This has never happened before, but it's definitely happening now. Let's see if we have any other questions in the chat. Just ask your question, and we will see what we can do here on the questions. Really appreciate you guys all joining. Oh. Let's see here. Oh, yeah. We had Gosman, 144,000, was asking about Pastor Nate. Yeah, Pastor Nate got busy. He's got a job now. He's doing just awesome stuff on Take on the World TV. Check out that YouTube channel. They've got quite a few syndicated shows on there. And Pastor Nate does do a show on that. And he's just got really super busy. I do hope at some point, he will come back. Definitely miss him as my co-host. And I told him, I said, I'm not putting anyone else in that seat. So you just let me know when you're ready and come on back. But yeah, he just got really busy. Had to kind of focus on a few things. And he is really busy with live streams on his channel and also the show he does on Take on the World TV. Speaking of Take on the World TV, We'll probably get an announcement here soon, but there will be a virtual conference coming up, I believe in August. I don't know, I think near the end of August. And that is going to be awesome in the end of August, and that will be Take on the World TV. And Nate will be doing a presentation there. I do know that. So keep on the lookout for that. Let's see what's going on here. Who is VFX? Yeah, exactly. A lot of people have no clue who he is, but like I'm telling you, I started watching him in 2007. Very, very influential in my life. That's all I can say. The guy, very, very smart, amazing at debates. Debating atheists. I think ideally it was atheists that he would encounter. So if you actually type in his name, you'll find so many atheists all over YouTube making fun of him. It was kind of like one of those things, you know, people making fun of like Kent Hovind or all these people that did all these debates. Well, Shawn was a pretty young guy at the time, and he did a ton of debates, but he did some really, really great work as far as videos and the way he kind of presented things. But yeah, and apologetics and debate, and just a very, very sharp mind. And recently he actually did a debate with Kent Hovind, which was really interesting. And they were getting into eschatology. That was recent. Like if you actually go to his channel, you'll notice there's only 2 videos up there. Well, there's a long story there, but he had lots and lots of videos. But over the years, he had death threats and certain things happened. And again, he was going to go into that story and you could hear what it was. But like I said, he upset a lot of people back in 2008, 2009. He retreated for a while, took a break, came back. He's been working in some, creation ministries, doing different things. I think he had a core responsibility in the Genesis Paradise Lost project. I still think they're doing some stuff there as well too. But like I said, he goes way back, and it'd be a real honor to have him on, and it was. And like I said, I don't know where he is because we just talked like 4 or 5 hours ago and everything was set, but something must have happened. So keep him in your prayers because this is definitely unusual for him. He was excited to come on, and like I said, I just talked with him like 4 or 5 hours ago and everything was fine. But now I'm looking and there's no response, and he's not even showing online. So obviously something's happening. So I hope he's okay, and I definitely will keep him in my prayers as well. But I'm sure we'll be able to circle around and get him on the show if we don't get him on today. So yes, I'm taking questions, so you can ask your questions. I'm not saying I'm going to answer them all, but if I feel like I'm called to answer them, I'll answer them. I don't want to get too massively political or too deep into stuff, but overall I just want to, if there's certain things on your heart, rather than getting into deep doctrine, it's more just whether it's current events, where I stand. If you're kind of curious, I don't mind saying that. I've been very open and honest with everyone where I stand, and there's a lot of rumors like that I said the end of the world's happening, this virus is going to kill everyone, and I mean, I can clarify and let you know where I stand. I do believe that it's real. I do think it's exaggerated, but there is a realness to it. I mean, my mother's friend actually got it, and a lot of people are like, do you know anyone that has it? And I'm like, I do, but obviously there's a lot of politicizing of it. I think that they're using it for their purposes. It's almost like something comes along, but as far as being manufactured, I don't believe it per se like that. I mean, it came from China. I do know that. I think it came from the lab. Whether it was purposely released or it was like, whoopsie, and they're like, oh crap, and they covered everything up. I lean more towards that, but I still think that regardless which way you go on this, God is still sovereign above all. And whether God allows things or he purposes things, it doesn't matter. Nothing happens in this world without God. Nothing happens outside of God's will. Nothing can override that. So, wherever you stand in this argument, at least you have to be able to admit God is allowing this mayhem to exist, or he would bring order. He can bring order whenever he wants. So that's kind of where I stand on that. But I definitely don't agree with the entire thing is 100% hoax. I do not agree at all. Now, I don't agree with a lot of stuff they're doing. I think that they're exercising too much power in states, and it's just incredible. I mean, whether this leads to a civil war, I don't know which way it's going to go, but I'm looking at how quickly things are escalating and changing. And really, if you start looking at just what they're trying to do beyond just the control, they're trying to rewrite America. They're trying to erase the past of America. This is what all Marxist and communist parties or associations do. And again, what's horrifying is they have a lot of control right now. They have a lot of people. Oh, and we got Shawn coming on here. So I'm glad to see that Shawn's here. So let's All right. He was having issues. We'll get him to speak here in a sec. Let's just get him on here. This is going to be good. So he was having issues. We'll find out. We'll find out. I'll give him a great intro. So he should be coming on here soon, hopefully.
Hello.
Shawn, are you there?
I hope so.
Nice. Well, you're live. You're on Celebrate Truth Radio. Welcome, my man. I didn't know what happened, and you said that real quick. You said that you had some internet issues, or what happened?
Yeah, that's right. I couldn't get back online. The router went down for some reason.
Gotcha. Well, we were praying because I was like, guys, this is really strange. This is the first time. This is episode 74. This has never happened. And I was saying, VFX is MIA, right? And I wasn't sure what was going on, but I'm glad to hear that you're okay. And it was just technical issues. But I had a lot of time to kind of tease because a lot of people are like, who is VenomFangX? Who is VFX? And I was kind of like, guys, back in 2007, he was massively influential in my life. And I told a little bit about just some of the creativity that you brought into some videos and kind of stories about a lot of people that you upset. Would that be a
Yes.
good summation of your early days on YouTube?
I would certainly agree to that, yes.
Yeah. Well, real quick, maybe just for everyone that's not aware, maybe you could just go in a little bit. I'd love to just hear your testimony, and then we'll get into like how you got on YouTube, and we'll go from there. But I wanted to kind of focus the first hour more just on you and your story, and then I think for the second hour I want to get in more about your really fascinating eschatology that you brought up with Ken Hovind with your debate there.
Sure.
Because I got thinking about it. It blew my mind. I was talking to a few people about it, and I said, listen to the show. Let him explain it, but I'm not saying I agree with it, but it's fascinating, right? It's something to kind of look at that hasn't been brought up before. So maybe you could just kind of explain a little bit about your story. I mean, kind of growing up and just how everything, just your walk with God.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Speaking of eschatology, briefly, yes, I'm very excited with what I've been learning for the last couple of months. It's definitely changed my view of the scriptures, the New Testament specifically, what it says about the age we're living in and the age that's about to come. But yeah, we could talk about my testimony before we
we'll have lots of
into all
time
of
in the
that.
second hour, and if you have a little bit more time, we can probably do like we do the after show on YouTube a little bit, and that's just up to
Sure.
you if you're good with it, just because we kind of missed out on a half
Yeah,
hour.
I feel like I owe you for the
Yeah.
technical difficulties.
Yeah,
I
you owe me.
apologize to you and the audience for that.
Yeah, well, I'm glad everything worked out. But yeah, if you want to just get into just your story, I know it's a powerful testimony, and quite honestly, it'll be new for me to hear it all as well too, because I just focused back
Sure.
in the day. I focused a lot on your debates and just your creativity in bringing the gospel and just your apologetics and just your knowledge and everything. And I wasn't really aware so much of your story, other than the fact that I know. And would you classify yourself a Messianic Jew?
No, I
Okay.
wouldn't. I would just call myself a Christian. I don't believe during the current dispensation of grace that there is a distinction between Jew or Gentile, as Paul puts it.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
he calls
good.
himself. Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself.
No,
so,
no,
yeah,
no.
my
It's
name-
it's all good. I decided to bring it up because I just know for the longest time I thought it was the coolest thing when I would run into quote unquote Messianic Jews, right? I was like, just wild to me. It was just an amazing thing because again, most have rejected the Messiah, right? And it's just it was a joyous thing for me. So I didn't mean to put a title on you. I was just curious if what you'd kind of refer yourself as, but you say
Sure.
a Christian, and I love it. So
Well, it's
continue on.
it's a good segue or introduction, I should say, to the topic of not just eschatology, but as Paul calls it, the right division of the scriptures to understand who we are in Christ. Is there a distinction between Jew and Gentile? It's obviously an important subject in the New Testament, so we'll get to that.
Sure.
So I don't know if you know this, but my name is Shawn. Perhaps the audience doesn't know that, but I was born into a Jewish home. At a very young age, I was taught the theory of evolution. I actually remember, it was grade 1. I was standing in front of my class reading a book on dinosaurs, talking about how they lived millions of years ago and they went extinct, and the whole scheme of evolutionary history. And so I was introduced to that at a very young age, in either it was school or watching stuff on television or reading books on dinosaurs. They got me at a very young age, and that changed my my life essentially, because on one hand I was being taught in Hebrew school, coming from a Jewish home, that God created the world, and then on the other hand, I was learning the Big Bang and that everything evolved over millions of years. And even at a young age, I realized there was a difference between these two worldviews. And at a very young age, I was convinced that religion was nonsense and that they were all fairy tales made by primitive people, and that we had just evolved from bacteria, and that we were all essentially accidents of nature, that there was no meaning to life, and anyone who said otherwise was just clinging to, ancient or childish views. And so I became an atheist at a very young age and was teaching that to my fellow students and my teachers. I got kicked out of Hebrew school at either grade 1 or grade 2 for that very reason. I became adamant that it was all a waste of time.
You were challenging people? You were challenging people in grade 1 or 2?
That's right.
Wow.
Especially at my Hebrew school, right? So they'd be teaching us how to pray. Yeah. They'd be teaching us the Torah. And I'd be raising my hand or drawing on the chalkboards, or even between the classes telling everyone that it was all nonsense and that they shouldn't believe it and stuff like that. So they kicked me out of the Hebrew school. And I remained an atheist until I was around 21 years old. I
got saved at the age of 21. Just interesting you said that. I was telling people that I got saved at 21.
So did I, yeah. It was June 28th, 2006. I was 21 then. And the way that came about was I was in a very dark place in my life. I had been in a dark place for years, but things were getting worse and worse progressively. And so at 21, I was suicidal, I was depressed, and I came across Dr. Kent Hovind's videos, who radically transformed my worldview, my life, taught me the truth that evolution was nonsense, and he taught the gospel. One thing that really stood out to me when I was watching Kent's videos was he spoke on things that I had learned way back in Hebrew school, things like Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark and Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and I sat there as I was confused because I didn't understand why this Gentile, this non-Jewish guy, was telling me about things I had learned in Hebrew school, about stories from the Torah. And so what occurred to me was that Jesus had revealed the God of Israel to the rest of the world, to the non-Jewish world, which is something that we expected the Messiah to do. But I had no idea that Christians read that their Bible contained the Torah, that Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, that was the first books of their scriptures. And so I came to the sudden realization that Jesus was the Jewish Messiah. I had no idea that he was Jewish. That's not something they teach you in Hebrew school. And I, as an atheist, never really looked into who Jesus was because I never cared. So this was all new information to me. And it radically transformed my life. I learned that evolution was a lie. And gave my life to the Lord there when I was 21.
So then you quickly, right afterwards, you must have jumped right onto YouTube because I think you started your channel in 2006.
That's right. So after a few months, my sister, actually, she was sick of me trying to convince her the Bible was true. So she was like, why don't you go tell someone else? Why don't you go make a YouTube video or something? So I said, okay, fine, I'll do that. And so I did.
Nice. So basically your sister was like, don't bug me. You go tell the world, do a YouTube channel. I don't want to hear it.
That's right.
That's actually hilarious. I've heard a lot of stories how people got into YouTube. That would be a first.
It's,
it was like,
I was also,
Shawn?
pretty much, I was in film school. So doing video work was, sort of a no-brainer. But I was not... I don't think I was ready at that time to go in front of the camera and start teaching people. Paul even gives you warnings about teachers shouldn't be, new to the faith. Got to be people who have been doing this for a while. So that was, I don't want to necessarily say a mistake on my part. I believe God in his timing, all things work together for good. But I certainly made my share of mistakes in my early ministry, and here we are many years later.
What would you say early on, like the Shawn now, looking back on it, what would you do different in the first early years of YouTube?
Maybe I'd be less antagonistic towards opposing views, and be a little more, the old adage where you can attract bees with honey. So gotcha. I certainly could have been a little sweeter.
So you're saying if you look back on it, you probably wouldn't have done the Allah is Satan video?
No, that one I love.
I do too. I do too. I do too. I was telling people about it because I didn't know if you're going to show up or not, but I'm like, I got to tell you because it was incredible. I remember, and then I went looking for it, and I was like crying almost. I couldn't find it. I'm like, no, where is it? I'm like typing everywhere, looking for it. But honestly, it was so brilliant how you did it, and it was like you'd think, you dressing up as a Batman because you were in a Batman outfit, were you?
Yes,
And you did the voice, and it was just brilliant. I mean, I was trying to explain. Because you don't have it up. Does anyone ever have a mirror? Did anyone mirror that? Does it exist anywhere?
Oh, it's there. Yeah, I
Okay.
know. I have a link to it. I
I
There's part 1 and part 2. I can send you the links.
Okay, maybe I'll put it in the description because quite honestly, I'm sure a lot of people would be fascinated to hear kind of or to see what I watched. But I remember when I saw that, I was like, in 2007. There weren't a lot of people doing what you were doing. I mean, they might do a video, but they didn't do a theatrical production almost, You had the voices, you had like the props, and you did this whole encounter
even
with
did
Mohammad.
claymation.
You did claymation. I mean, so it was like, who is this guy? And like, how is he putting all this stuff together? But it makes sense now that you were in film school. I didn't know that at the time, but I just knew there was something special because not only were you brilliant, I mean, you were incredibly smart, but also, there was a lot of creativity to your videos. That really caught on. I don't even know how many views that video got, but I'll tell you, did it go somewhat viral? Because I'm sure it got into a lot of.
It must
Muslim
have
fans.
because I run into people every now and again who seem to. That's the video they bring up when they talk.
Well, I'll tell
me
everyone right now because people are asking about it, and he said after it he'll send the links, and I'll put them in the description. Because quite honestly, I mean, it has been years, Shawn. I mean, it's been over a decade since I've seen that video.
Frankly, they are the claymation part. I think was great. The stuff with me in the Batman costume is a little silly, or
well, it is and it isn't.
In 2020, it doesn't quite hold up.
No. But keep in mind that on the show we're saying, listen, this is literally someone coming onto YouTube, and within the very first year of YouTube, you're putting together stuff like that, right? Some amateur guy just coming on wants to start sharing the gospel, talking about apologetics, start thinking outside the box, and I mean it was incredibly creative, and it was definitely well done in that time, especially for YouTube. I mean, you wouldn't want to do like a put out a DVD, you know what I mean, and have people pay $29.95 for it. But what my point is, it was incredibly well done. Conveying a message like theatrically almost where people could kind of get involved, they learn, but they could also somewhat be entertained at the same time, if that makes sense.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was important to me in the early stages of YouTube. We're not just preachers preaching behind a pulpit, although of course that's needed and necessary. But me being a younger guy at that time, I was more interested in, like you just said, not just teaching, but also entertaining. But there's a temptation to go too far with that. And I certainly went too far in a few places.
But I didn't know a lot of that stuff. Like for example, like the stuff that you went through, the dialogue with the angel, and an interesting parallel with Mormonism and Islam, right? The angel of light appearing, But the way you did it, I mean, I was learning in that. I'm like, I never knew. I didn't know that, all these things. So you're bringing this entertaining value, but you're teaching people like, wow, in a way, Islam
what's
is
beautiful about. Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about doing it the way I did it. Not to toot my own horn, but by doing it in claymation, the visuals get burned into your brain forever.
Yep.
So you can never not think, with the sheer silliness of the whole thing.
Yeah.
I guess the audience who hasn't seen it doesn't know what I'm talking about. But if you imagine. The inspiration for it was those old Christmas specials with like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer.
When I was watching it, I was like, yeah, that's exactly the vibe I got. But it was great because you put like Surah, 26:5. Like you would, you'd have that claymation, but then you'd have that Surah, when you were doing the ones with the Islam. And that was really great because you'd reference it with the Surah that it was quoting, and you'd be like, what? Does it actually say that? That is absurd. Yeah, and you'd look it up and you'd be like, oh my goodness.
Look it up and like, yeah, it's there.
Yeah,
it really
you made
there.
it funny, and you made it funny, and I mean, like you could say, oh, it was, kind of making fun of that religion, but it wasn't because you were telling the truth. You were telling the truth because you were quoting the surahs, but you're making these little claymation things, and it was funny. I mean, I can visualize it now. I'm excited to actually watch it again because it's like, going way back. But I just remember, starting to follow you, and then, getting into your debates. Would you say that you would be debating mainly atheist kind of in your ministry? Was it mainly atheist, or would you find there was all different types that you encountered in that time?
Certainly on YouTube, it was the atheists who gave me the most trouble, I suppose, or challenged me the most. So we interacted with them. the most, but privately, offline, not offline, but in either message boards, chat rooms, and my own private ministry off of YouTube. Yeah, I interact a lot with people of other faiths, Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Muslims, all of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And you were basically, doing that. And would you say that you kind of became a target of a lot of atheists? Like, I think
Yes.
your name spread everywhere. It was just like, let's go at him, and you like had no fear. I mean, you're going up against anyone really.
Yeah, it was fun. It was exciting, and definitely a little dangerous too. I received death threats back in, I guess it was 2008, 2000.
Was
Yeah.
this atheist, or was this more because of what you said about Islam?
It may have been both. I'm
Okay.
not exactly sure.
Okay. I always kind of thought it had something to do with, Muslims that got really upset. But again, it could have been either or. That's
Right,
the
it
feeling
could have been
I had,
atheists
that you got-
pretending to be Muslims. I don't know.
maybe I'm not sure. So let's get into your name, because again, I've heard it, I forget, but I know no one really has a clue, and I don't either. VenomFangX. Why did you come up with that name? It was such a unique name. It was so bizarre for your channel and just for you
Yeah.
to start what you did on YouTube in 2006.
Yeah, there's nothing really to it. It was my old gamer tag.
Okay.
I used to be a fan of like Marvel versus Capcom, if anyone knows what that was. And there was a character in that called Venom, who is a Marvel Comics character, arch nemesis of Spider-Man. And then when you hit down forward punch, he'd do the move called the Venom Fang. And then another thing I liked was Mega Man X, and so VenomFangX just was a gamer tag I used to use, always used, still used to this day, and that's all there is to it.
Gotcha. So it basically had to do with your gaming background.
That's right.
In the same of that. Well, yeah, because I never really understood if there was something, you just kind of stayed rather than changing it up. You just kind of just stuck with your username throughout all the time.
I wonder if using that username in particular, or if I had done something a little more like biblical, what difference that would have made in the long term. But it is what it is.
Well, it wouldn't matter. I mean, once people were subscribed to you and they were fans of you, I mean, they didn't really care. You know what I mean? It just
Sure.
became that's who you were. And I think for the
Right.
longest time, no one really even knew your name. I think
Right.
down the road you started kind of maybe it leaked or you started mentioning it, but I know you're pretty tight-lipped about it in the beginning.
That's
I think.
interesting.
Maybe
Yeah,
not.
it's possible.
Like I said,
No.
it's been a long time. And here's the unfortunate thing is all your videos are gone now. You wiped your channel. Why did you choose to get rid of basically all the past?
Oh, I didn't. So my family received death threats in the mail, and they took it upon themselves. My brother-in-law was a military computer scientist, and he basically went on my machine. He somehow knew how to get all my passwords, and he shut down my channel, all behind my back. I had no say in it at all.
And so did you have someone running it for a bit, or was it you? Like for some reason I thought maybe there was like, you disappeared and then all of a sudden some videos started surfacing and I'm like, well, is it Shawn? Is it someone else now? Like I wasn't sure if there was a
so
transition.
after my channel went down, and I brought it back up, my videos were gone. Couldn't recover them. So that was, all the videos with like millions of hits or whatever, they were gone. And so then I gave my channel to, I think his name was Gear Up. He was another user on YouTube that I really enjoyed listening to. And I said, why don't you take the reins of the channel for a bit and take some of the hostility, direct it towards you. And that way...
He's actually in the chat right now, actually. He just
Really?
joined the chat. He just said, this is synchronicity. VFX gave me his channel for a little while. Gear Up. You just mentioned his name and he just posted. I'm not joking. He's in the YouTube chat right now.
That's awesome. Let me say hello to Gear Up.
Yeah.
Been a while.
Yeah.
Hope he's well. Hope his family's doing well. And thanks for taking over for that short period of time. You were great.
I do remember that because I'm like,
love to hear-
new VenomFangX video, and I go to look and I'm like, who's this guy, right? But it didn't matter at the time. I'm like, well, it's got to be something special because he's under this channel, and I know he was doing ministry as well too. So I do remember that vaguely. But anyways, I never really asked, but I just knew you were gone for a while. I'm like, oh, that's too bad. I guess he's gone, and I guess this guy's taken over. But then I was surprised all of a sudden you appeared again, and it was like, well, there he is, right? So it was kind of you were coming and going, and I was just like. Yeah, I never really reached out to you, but I was just kind of following you, and I'm like, well, something's going on. And then, in the last few years, you've kind of surfaced more, and you're getting. It looks like you're starting to resurface, and you're planning to do a lot more on YouTube. Is that correct?
I would like to be more active than I have been. As for how much content I'll produce, it depends on I guess how busy I am with other things. I've got
Sure.
a few other projects.
Yeah,
right
we'll
now,
get into that
but,
as well too if you want to discuss that, and then also we'll
Sure.
we have your channel linked in the description. But if you want to definitely talk about where people can learn more about you, but also maybe some projects or things that you're working on, we can definitely talk about that. So very cool.
Absolutely.
No, well, I just wanted to kind of go. It was kind of more for my benefit because I know a lot. I really don't know anyone in my chat at this point that's like, oh yeah, I remember it. Like maybe they've got on YouTube later in life or whatever. But I do know for that time, if you were dealing with apologetics and debating and the whole atheist and Christian debates and stuff, you were the guy. You know what I mean? You were one of the guys. I know there were a few out there, but you were pretty much, definitely you would go to you and say, this is somebody to be reckoned with. So would you say that like early on you got just really incredibly educated? Like you said Kent Hovind, and he was a huge influence in my life too. I mean, I was blown away at his videos when it came, because I'm like you, Shawn, that really I started laughing at the Bible, thinking it's a joke, right? I mean, how can I trust a Bible that doesn't even understand how the origins, happened, right?
That's right. If you can't get past the first chapter of the Bible, then the rest of it's not going to make any sense either. So
so I was the same way. I mean, the science basically was the reason that I'm just like, there's no way I'm going to follow this book. And I started laughing at Noah's Ark and thinking, what bunch of ridiculous nonsense, right? All the animals on a boat and just all this kind of stuff. And when Kent Hovind came around, he was part of the whole journey because I got saved even before I knew about Kent. But then he just had an elegant way of explaining it. And it wasn't just believing in something anymore. It was defending it. It was proving it. And you're like, wow. Like you can scientifically prove that evolution is nonsense.
Yes, absolutely. And in particular, the Noah's Ark stuff, when you realize that God actually flooded the world and the evidence is all around us, you start to get, and especially when you're not saved, you start to feel the fear of God for the first time. And it's terrifying. And I certainly experienced that. And but on the flip side, when you begin to experience the terror of the judgment of God, the reality of that's when you also begin to realize, but wait, if there is a God, he's also able to save from judgment. And how can he save me? And that's where the beauty of the gospel comes in. So very exciting stuff.
Other than Kent Hovind, though, like, were you reading a lot of books? Like, where were you getting a lot of, so early on, being that educated? Like, like you said, to teach and to do these things, you should be in the faith a long time. But it almost seemed like you had been a Christian for 10 years, the level of what you were at, the caliber you were at, right? And I mean, maybe it was just a God ordained type of gift that you had, or you were just generally a very educated, smart dude, and all of a sudden it was like, now I'm going to basically apply that into learning everything I can about apologetics and the defense of the Christian faith. Would you say it was a bit of both, like, or was it mainly
I would say I was I just began to devour the Bible as soon as I got saved. So I got a Bible, started reading. Obviously started watching a lot of YouTube videos, listening to sermons. I also started attending Bible school, Bible college in 2007, maybe even at the end of 2006. I mean, I got right in there.
Yeah.
So, I just had an appetite for, it was like I had entered an entirely new world, and I wanted to know as much as I possibly could.
Gotcha. So yeah, we just basically devoured. I always tell people, like, before I got saved, I couldn't stand reading. I mean, the only books I read were the ones that I had to for school, right? But I couldn't stand reading. When I got saved, I could not put a book down. I mean, I just had this thirst, and especially everything to do, not just the Bible, but apologetics, eschatology. These were huge topics that I was just so fascinated. I'm like, wow.
That's exactly right. I look at my book collection. So before I got saved, I didn't have any books.
Yeah.
Books didn't interest me at all. And now I've got this massive collection.
Hold that thought, Shawn. We're going to go to a quick break here. We're at the top of the hour. You're listening to Celebrate Truth Radio, episode 74 with VenomFangX. We'll be right back after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
When a narco-syndicalist commune. We take it in turns to act as a sort of executive officer for the week. Yes. But all the decisions of that officer have to be ratified at a special bi-weekly meeting. Yes, I see. By a simple majority in the case of purely internal affairs. Be quiet. But by a 2/3 majority in the case of more... Be quiet. I order you to be quiet. Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look! It's just a flesh wound.
I don't believe I've seen such a display of courage, skill, nerve, grace, and stupidity.
I'll do you for that. Oh, what? Come here. What are you going to do, bleed on me? I'm invincible. You're a loony. The Black Knight always triumphs.
Roundtable Live Monday through Friday, 1 a.m. till 4 a.m. Eastern Time. Bring your mind, bring your ideas, bring your voice. King Arthur had nothing on us here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com.
Did you ever feel that things were not quite right? That everything was just ever so slightly askew?
Do you have, to paraphrase Morpheus, a splinter in your mind?
If you're interested in hearing the latest information about UFOs, the paranormal,
ancient cultures and structures,
monatomic elements,
longevity,
fantastic discoveries in science,
downloaded to your brain,
then tune into us. Hi, I'm Dave.
And I'm Mackie.
And we are Shiny Side Out, Sundays 2 to 4 a.m. Eastern. See you then.
Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom!
The future is uncertain. I know this. Death is inevitable. I know this. But one thing is certain. As free men, it is our right to live unencumbered and in peace. And those times are quickly drawing to an end. And in these times, peace is certainly an illusion. And as the chains grow tighter, our ability to slip those chains increase incrementally with every passing moment. Inaction is no longer an option. It's time to raise our voices like a cacophony of thunder and lightning and tell the masters no more. And this is Nighthawk, and I say, for myself, no more. Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, because the freedom is slipping away. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Celebrate Truth Radio. This is Hour 2. My special guest this evening is VenomFangX, Shawn, and it's a real privilege to have him on. We go way back as far as he didn't know me, but I definitely watched him and got to know him very well as far as his debating skills and just his level of knowledge when it came to apologetics, and I learned a ton from him just through his creative videos and just with taking on a lot of different people. How would you say that that all came to be? Like, was it an atheist that just kind of said, hey, I want to debate you? How did you start debating atheists?
That's a good question. I think I just took from Kent, seeing that he had sort of thick skin, and obviously he was playing both offense and defense in his videos. I definitely took some notes from him. I kind of came at it with the energy and the expectation that there was going to be an opposition to it. Certainly because I was an atheist prior to that, so I knew how they thought, and I knew that they were out there. I knew that that was the prevailing worldview in sort of Western culture, and so I knew my audience.
So was it over time? Was it draining for you? Like, I mean, at a certain point, it must have started weighing on you, because I mean, you were getting attacked heavily, man. I mean, it was everywhere. There were videos being done of you, and I mean, being in the public's spotlight. I know what that feels like. Now you get memes made of you and all sorts of things, but there was just a level of hate that's coming at you so fiercely. I'm just wondering overall how that was for you spiritually, or even just emotionally or physically.
Sure. I'd say there were two things going on. So every day I'd receive messages. YouTube had a way better messaging system back then.
Yeah.
So I'd receive messages from people who were getting saved almost daily. Not necessarily because of me, but I'd point people to Kent's videos, or I'd answer some questions that they had. And anyway, so there was a lot of encouraging things happening every day that kept me going. And of course, you'd get nasty comments or videos made about you or whatever, and all you'd have to do is understand that this is the enemy, that this is what Satan does, and these people are in bondage to his deceptions, and this is why we do what we do, is we're fighting against all that darkness. And if you're not experiencing that, if there is no opposition to your ministry, then are you even doing any damage to the kingdom of darkness? Probably not. So I always took it as a sign that I was doing something right, even when I guess sometimes I was doing something wrong. I'm certainly, like I said, I did a little bit of that too. So yeah, it was all a learning experience. It was all new to me, but it was also fun. I can't deny that.
It seemed like you were having fun with it. Yeah, it seemed like you're having fun with it. You made it kind of, I guess, enjoyable based on just the level of attacks that were coming your way. Would you say that you were ever challenged? Like, it seemed to me in the debates I watched, you never really were at a point where you were at loss for words, or that you couldn't, have a good rebuttal.
I'm not going to say that I always rebutted correctly. But yeah, when you know that you're right, when you know the Bible's true, you know the Lord, then why wouldn't why would you cower to these people who believe something even more absurd? There's no reason for us to feel ashamed of the gospel or what we believe, and I certainly wanted to convey that to the audience, to let them know that we stand on solid ground, and we do.
Well, before we get into kind of that new eschatological worldview that you brought up with your debate with Kent, I think that's going to be fascinating. But before we get into that, was there anything else that you look back on now that you've literally changed your opinion on? Again, we're talking secondary doctrines. Obviously, the essentials are all, intact with you. But I'm just curious if there's something else you look back on and you changed over time. Whether, we're talking whether it was like pre-trib or whatever. Obviously, this has kind of morphed and changed for you. Maybe it hasn't. But also, when it came to some other topics, I'm just always curious to know, over a span of 15 years, what do you look back on and saying, yeah, I definitely changed. I thought this then, but I think this now.
As far as doctrine is concerned, I've been, I guess, very consistent. Obviously, I'm still a young earth creationist.
Yep.
I still believe, we're saved by grace through faith. I still believe the gospel. So none of those have changed. The things that have changed are more about my approaches, my argumentation, avoiding logical fallacies, I guess being more gracious to the opposition, things like that. Nothing as far as my worldview. I think I got like we just said, I got my essentials correct right away, which really helped from the beginning.
I'm talking more secondary doctrine type stuff. You know what I mean? Like whether it was the gifts, you have a different view now than you did when you first started out, or, we're going to talk about eschatology here. A lot of people change in time, we know that it's not salvational, right? But we know that people change their views. I mean, for example, Kent Hovind was pre-trib for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, in prison, and maybe with some research, he's like, I don't believe in pre-trib anymore. I'm now, pre-wrath.
Yep, I've been consistent in that as well. I've always believed in pre-trib. What's changed is my defense of it and why I believe it. I don't think if you had asked me back in 2007 I don't think I even ever made a video about the pre-trib rapture just because I wasn't able to defend it.
Gotcha.
I believed it. I sort of knew in my spirit it was true, but I didn't know why. And so I sort of avoided that. But now I certainly could defend it. and I guess we'll get into that shortly.
Yeah, and more so than just that nature, because I would say that a big portion of my audience, I believe, probably wouldn't be pre-trippers. There'd probably be some, but even myself, I moved in time. But I found that with what you brought up, it wasn't the pre-trib thing. It was just your entire look at reading the Bible again. It was almost like, for me, when I started going into, looking into, scientism versus science and going into my thing, I'm like, what if I took a more literal interpretation of the Bible where it applied? Kind of like, is it 6 literal days, or is it, is that allegory? That means millennials, So I did the same type of thing. So I'm looking at that idea where you've kind of taken it and going, I'm rereading the Bible with this new outlook. What happens? Does it all piece together? What I found fascinating is so far, everything seems to be gelling together for you, and there's nothing really else that comes along where you're like, oh, that doesn't work with this worldview. Everything seemed to kind of mesh together. And I mean, you can definitely explain it, but I definitely wanted to get into that because it wasn't so much about the pre-trib. It was more just about how you view Gentiles and Jews and just Paul and Peter and, the whole thing. So I don't know if you want to just start from the beginning and explain maybe how you started looking, how that came about. But I do think it's very fascinating. It's worth bringing up to my audience.
Sure, absolutely. Let me give you a little bit of background as to my journey in the last couple of years and how I came to my current understanding of New Testament, not just eschatology, but soteriology and a few other issues as well. So I started working on a film project. So I went to Pensacola, Florida to spend some time with Eric, Kent's son, spend some time with his ministry. And he was working with a film production with the Genesis Paradise Lost film. I don't know if you saw it. That came out a few years ago. So I met the director through Eric. He was there working in their offices, and Eric was a producer on the film. So I met Ralph. He's the director, and Ralph and I have become good friends, and we're working on a new project right now.
That was the 3D animated one, right? Wasn't that the computer animated? Yeah.
Yeah, so we turned Genesis Chapter 1 into a 3D animated film, but we also interviewed creation scientists at the Answers in Genesis Museum. So Ken Ham and Ray Comfort makes an appearance in that too. Highly recommended.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of what Living Waters or Wretched or that whole crew. I got to meet Kurt and Ray, but really, really enjoyed over the years just their passion for the gospel.
Yes. They're all very important figures, both in my life and I'm sure many of the audience's life as well. So we worked on the Genesis movie for, I think it was 4 years. I was the editor, so I edited the entire film. But I did other things as well. But what I did is not important. What's important is the movie is great. I'd say it's the most well-made Christian... creation. It's a Christian film, but as far as creation goes, it's the best presentation
of
creationism I think that's ever been put to film. And for anyone interested, check out Genesis Paradise Lost. It's on Amazon. You can find it online. Order the DVD or just a digital download. Very, very powerful. A lot of people's lives were changed watching that movie, and it's beautiful too. The graphics and the music and everything. It's so well done. And anyway, so I met Ralph through the production, and he began to question things in the New Testament. Not question whether they were true or not, but he began to doubt if, for example, could we lose our salvation? He kept reading things that Jesus would say about the importance of cutting off your right hand so that you don't get thrown into hell and stuff like that. And so I always believed that when we're saved. God makes us into his children and nothing can change that. But he kept bringing up verses that really do cast, when you read them at face value, they really do cast doubt upon the security of the believer. However, most of the things that he would quote, you'd find he'd be quoting Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, the book of Hebrews, the book of 1st, 2nd, or 3rd John, the book of Revelation, but he would avoid Paul. Anyway, so I began to look into this to try to defend my view of salvation. And he also became extremely, him similar to Kent Hovind, he came down hard on the post-trib, mostly due to Matthew 24 and Revelation, which talk about the tribulation and then the sun going dark, the moon turning to blood, and then Christ comes and the tribes of the earth mourn and all that. And so those two issues losing salvation and the second coming of Christ after the tribulation. Those two views, my director, Ralph, he really wanted to figure out. They weren't part of the Genesis movie, but just behind closed doors. Those were discussions that we were having, and he was really challenging me on that, and I couldn't give a good response. And that really pushed me to start looking into this. And so that's when I discovered something called mid-acts dispensationalism, which for the last couple of months I've just been digging in deep, and it's been shocking how many things that didn't make sense, things that perhaps I would just choose not to think about, now suddenly make perfect sense. And the entire New Testament, as I've been reading it through, verses that I would just skip over or my mind would just glaze over because I didn't understand before, now the entire thing, the whole picture I see with great clarity. And so many things make sense. Where do I begin? Let me think. Okay, so if you look at the Old Testament by itself, there is no mention of how we understand salvation today. There's no understanding of a time in history where there would be no nation of Israel. And the entire Old Testament deals with Israel and pictures a time where the Gentiles would be blessed through Israel. And then when we come to the New Testament, specifically in the letters of Paul, at this time God is not recognizing Israel. Israel is fallen, as we find out in Romans 11. And yet God is creating something called the body of Christ, where Jews and Gentiles alike without the nation of Israel are receiving salvation. But that distinction, I never understood it, and I never thought too much about that. But when you begin to read Paul's letters and what he's actually saying, there's clearly what Paul calls the dispensation of grace. Something new has begun in the New Testament that was not foretold in the Old Testament, a mystery, as Paul calls it. And as we begin to look at what this mystery is and when it began and the implications for today, it creates a distinction between what we within the Mid-Acts view call the prophetic Israel program. So everything to do with the nation of Israel given through the prophets, the messianic kingdom that's on the earth, the nation of Israel, where Christ is going to be on earth in the nation, ruling and reigning from Jerusalem, versus this current time where the nation of Israel is fallen, they don't recognize their Messiah, and there is no distinction between Jew or Gentile today. God is not making that distinction, and anyone who puts their trust in the risen Christ, in his death, burial, and resurrection, they are added to what is called the body of Christ, the church, the body of Christ. And Paul is the only person in the New Testament to talk of that group, because he's the first member of that group. Paul says, and I'll pull up some verses, where he says that in me first, as a pattern to them who should hereafter believe. So something happened with Paul
real
that
quick,
became a pattern.
There's some clicking going on your mic. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry. I get very animated when I begin to talk, so my arm.
Okay, I just know it'll probably be distracting for people, maybe. And so I just, if you know,
okay,
something, it's just tinging. It's like you're talking, and it's like clink, 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 clink.
Let me see if I can fix that. Okay, yeah. I'll try to be more still. Okay, is it any better?
I don't hear the clinging anymore.
Great. So where was I? I was talking about Paul.
Yep.
So Paul, yes. So something happened to Paul that was distinct from what was happening in the Gospels. So Paul was never baptized by John. He didn't receive water baptism, and yet Christ saved him. And he said that his salvation, Paul's salvation, was a pattern for those who after him believe. And so when we look at Paul in his letters, we read his epistles carefully, he speaks of a mystery which was not revealed to the prophets, a means of salvation which Israel did not know. And that is what we know today, which is the gospel of grace. So if you go back to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus, the disciples, John the Baptist, they're preaching something called the gospel of the kingdom. And Jesus is sending his disciples to the nation of Israel, preaching the good news that their Davidic messianic kingdom is about to break into world history. Repent and believe the gospel is what they're commanded to do, to believe that God had now sent the one who was promised, the Davidic Messiah. And Israel rejected that message. And so that whole message, that whole program was put on hold, was put on the shelf. Mm-hmm. And then God began something new with our apostle, with Paul. And so Paul, under the kingdom program said that you had to be baptized in water, believe that Jesus was the Davidic king, repent. all of that. Paul didn't do any of that. Paul was just hand-chosen by God from heaven at a moment in his life, and he couldn't have been saved under Israel's program because he had blasphemed the Holy Spirit, and Jesus had clearly said that if you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, you can't be saved in this age or in the age to come. And Paul was there at the stoning of Stephen, who was filled with the Holy Spirit, and he consented to his stoning, which caused the nation of Israel to fall. So under that program, Paul couldn't have been saved, which is why Paul is so thankful to God and says that he was saved by exceedingly abundant grace. So above and beyond the grace which was available to Israel, God saves Paul. And that's what God's doing today. He is just by exceedingly abundant grace, God is now saving people without the nation of Israel, without the prophetic kingdom program. When we go around preaching, we don't preach that God is about to set up his Davidic kingdom in the nation of Israel. What we preach is Christ crucified and his death and resurrection for our sins. And that's not what the disciples were preaching in the first century when Jesus was alive on the earth.
Question for you real quick, though. What are we grafted into when that takes place?
Okay, great. So Romans 11, where it says, they were grafted out that we could be grafted in.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great video about this. Do you know Scott Clark?
I don't.
Okay, he's a YouTuber. He has a great video about the grafting. Some of your
real
audience.
Quick, I don't want to distracting. I just thought really quickly.
Sure.
We're grafted in. What are we grafted into? Are we not grafted into Israel?
No, of course not, because Israel is grafted out. How can we be grafted into the thing that's being grafted out?
So what are we being grafted into?
Into Christ.
Okay, good. Continue on. I just want to get that clarification.
Very well.
Yep.
Sure. But yes, I recommend Scott Clark's video on that particular subject.
Mm-hmm.
So, I did lose my train of thought, but let me rewind. So, if you read the Gospels carefully, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Jesus is preaching to the tribes of Israel. He's telling his disciples, do not go in the way of the Gentiles. This message is not for them. He's telling them that Israel needs to repent, receive this message of their kingdom, and when they do, Jesus says specifically that generation will not pass until they see all these things come to pass, referring to the second coming, the setting up of the kingdom, and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And so you ask yourself this, did the kingdom come in the first century? The whole preterist view, where they believe that...
I don't believe so, no.
Okay, neither do I. But the question is why? Why didn't the kingdom get set up in the first century?
Because they obviously believed that it was coming in their time, in their lifetime.
Oh, yeah, they absolutely did. And
so the question is, why not? Yeah, and that's what I want you to get into, just with your understanding why it didn't occur.
Right. So Jesus made it perfectly plain to the nation of Israel. He was there, and if they had received him, they would have received the kingdom right then and there in the first century. Jesus would have set up his kingdom, and we'd be entering into the millennial. We would have already been, 2,000 years ago, there would have already have been the kingdom of God on earth. But Israel rejected the king. And as soon as they did that, the entire prophetic clock was paused. And we can prove this because if you read in the early book of Acts, chapter 2 or chapter 3, where Peter is preaching, he says, "Ye men of Israel, you've crucified your Messiah, repent of this." And then he quotes from the book of Joel, and he says that this is what Joel foretold, that the moon would turn dark the sun would turn dark and the moon to blood. And if you read the book of Joel, he's talking about the time of tribulation. So the time of tribulation was about to begin in the first century. And Peter thought it was about to occur. And it's not that he was mistaken. It really was. But in God's providence and knowing what was about to happen, because Israel rejected the king of the kingdom, the entire scheme, the entire program was put on hold. And so it will resume in the future, but that's not currently what God's doing. It was what he was doing, but when Israel rejected this message, when they rejected the kingdom, the entire program was put on hold, and God began a new program with the Apostle Paul called the Gospel of Grace. And so that is how we're saved today. And when you make this distinction, when he tells us, the way we need to study is to rightly divide the scriptures, we need to make a division between Israel's program and Paul's mystery gospel or mystery program. And when we do that, and we start to put things on one side or the other, everything begins to make perfect sense. You've got Jesus preaching to his people, as Paul calls him. He says that Jesus was a minister to the circumcision, to confirm the promises made by their fathers. While he was on earth, that's exactly what he did. But after they rejected him, after he ascended, Christ did something brand new, which was not foretold, which Paul calls a mystery. And that mystery is how we partake of the benefits of Christ and of salvation today. But
Question
one day,
for you, when you were talking about the Gentiles, where it talks about if you love me, you'll keep my commandments. What would you say as far as that program? What are his commandments? Would you say that the Torah applies? Now, again, I'm not talking salvation. I'm saying as a an adopted son or daughter. As far as obeying God and his commandments, do you believe that the Torah applies in that context? Not talking salvational, that we need to keep the law to be saved.
Sure.
But do you believe that we need to obey his commandments as far as, working out our, as far as our sanctification?
Sure. If you make a distinction between, let's say, the 10 Commandments and then the all the ordinances of Israel, like the Levitical priesthood and all the laws of, dietary laws, kosher laws, and all that, I would say Paul clearly reiterates, don't fornicate, don't commit adultery, don't, we all know the New Testament. So there are clearly things for us today. We're not lawless. We believe that there are things that are right and wrong regardless of God's dispensation. Yeah. However, as far as laws specific to Israel, like Sabbath laws, which were clearly a sign given between God and Israel, Paul tells us, let no one judge you in those matters, because those things were merely shadows of the substance, which is Christ. So I don't believe that all of the Jewish laws, or even most of the Jewish laws, apply to us today. As far as what commandments we keep, Paul, I'd have to pull up the verse, Paul says that his writings, his teachings, are the commandments of the Lord for us today. So yes, we always need to follow the commandments of the Lord. The question is, what has the Lord commanded us for us to do today?
Gotcha.
And so God's commandments throughout Scripture, depending on who's he's speaking to, they do change. God commanded Noah to build an ark. That doesn't mean that I have to build an ark.
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Right. So
yeah,
God's
I was talking more,
nation,
some Christians will say, we need to keep the moral law. We don't need to keep the ceremonial laws, but we need to keep the moral laws. So I was just kind of keeping it easy and just saying, hey, the 10 Commandments, right? Some people would say that it's not so much bound to it. We don't need to obey it. We don't need to keep it because, we're saved. And, again, that just applied to the Jews. And, I wouldn't agree fully. Again, I do agree it has zero to do with salvation, especially when you're talking about the mystery as far as the new, as far as that goes. But I don't hold to, just disregarding it because just saying it was just for the Jews. Now, I do see what you're saying, and that's why I find it fascinating going into, when you were talking about how, you look at it like there's ones that set our sights for heaven, and the other, here on earth, which I found fascinating. Maybe you can go into that a little bit on the difference and the reasons why. Sure.
So Jesus talks to his audience saying, the meek shall inherit the earth. The expectation for Israel is that they will rule and reign on the earth. That's their program. But Paul stresses for us that don't set your affections on things on the earth, set your affections on things in heaven, and that we are to rule and reign in heavenly places. And he talks about that there are earthly bodies and there are heavenly bodies, and that Christ is going to reconcile all things, both in heaven and on earth. So Paul's group, the part of the mystery of his presentation, his gospel, is that his group are destined for a destiny that is not the nation of Israel. Paul makes very little mention of Israel other than to say that Jesus was born of the seed of David and gives us some history. But as far as his future expectation, Paul doesn't tell us that we're going to rule and reign on the earth. He actually says we're going to rule and reign from heaven, which is different from Israel's expectation. And so God appears to be, through the story of the Bible, the Bible begins in the Old Testament with God's plan to return dominion over the earth, but there's no mention of how God intends to rule the heavens. We know that God's about to kick out Satan and his demonic his fallen angels from heaven. But how is God going to replace their dominions and powers and principalities, the positions that are going to be vacant? That's what the body of Christ is being formed for. We're going to rule and reign in all those vacant places that are about to be made vacant when they are kicked down to the earth in the book of Revelation. That all needs to be unpacked, and I'm kind of giving you a quick summary. But that's my understanding now, is that our destiny is not to rule and reign on the earth. We're actually going to rule and reign the heavenly realm, whereas Israel, the Old Testament saints, and those early first century believers, the disciples who are going to rule and reign on 12 thrones. And if you read in the book of Revelation, you can see that there's those who come out of the tribulation who are singing a song that they're going to rule and reign on the earth. So God's clearly setting up these two groups, one to rule and reign on the earth and one to rule and reign in heaven. And that's going to be how God's dominion, his kingdom, is a kingdom that encompasses both heaven and earth.
Why do you think that would be, that they wouldn't be able to participate in the 1,000-year reign on earth, the Christ reign that takes place? Well, like, again, I hear what you're saying. One's destined for heaven, one's destined for earth. But the question is, why would they be exempt from that? You think that would be a really special time to rule and reign with Christ on earth? Oh,
I see what you're saying. Well, think about this. So Christ is here with us now in the sense that, wherever two or three are gathered in his name, there he is. So Jesus, though he's exalted to the highest place and sitting on the throne of God, in another sense, he's here with us now. His power is certainly, he from his exalted position, he certainly has sovereignty over the earth and rules and reigns from his heavenly position. I believe that we will rule and reign with Christ from a heavenly position, which obviously we've never experienced, so I don't know what that's going to be like. But I think it's possible that from such an exalted position, our proximity to Christ may be even greater than if it was us being in the flesh on earth. I can't speak from experience, of course, but we also need to keep in mind that Paul talks about us being face to face with the Father during that time, and so we're going to have intimacy with God during that time that may be even greater than Israel will experience having Christ in the flesh there sitting on his throne. I often think, how with millions of people, billions of people on the earth, and Christ is there in Jerusalem, how are you going to spend any time with him? Is he going to have he's not going to have time for every individual. Right? So it's a wonderful thought. And, sure, I'd love to spend some time with Jesus on earth, but exciting.
Think of the ark when you do the cubits, when you start measuring just the dimensions of the ark and understanding, kind of how big that is. I mean, have you actually started piecing together how big New Jerusalem is? That thing's monstrous.
Yes, I've heard. It does sound quite large.
It's very
large. It's very exciting. And I'm not saying that we can't visit it, and I'm not saying that we won't be there. But our primary residence appears to be in heaven, and that New Jerusalem is the promised city that Abraham was looking for, and was promised to him and his descendants. And so I don't want to be dogmatic on whether or not we will be in the New Jerusalem. It certainly is possible that we will be. I'm not saying we're not. But as far as what Paul says and what Paul writes to us, he doesn't really make mention of our participation in that. He tells us, he gives us sort of a different picture, is all I can say at the moment.
Sure. I think a lot of people object to the whole pre-trib down the road, because well, wait a minute. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, that we're not going to go through any hard times. I mean, why would we just be taken out? Now, what I thought was interesting that you brought up, because I take the view that, God is not going to send his wrath on his own people, right? But with what you brought up, the fact that, I forget what verse it is, and maybe you can quote it, talking about how the Antichrist is used as a tool for God's wrath. So even the very existence of the Antichrist, even when it's not completely overtly aggressive, the entire plan is God's wrath, which maybe you can explain that a little bit, because that threw me for a loop. Not saying I totally agree with it, but again, I think, iron sharps iron, and it's good to hear different viewpoints where you're kind of challenged and you look at things and you're like, man, that's a good point. Because if the Antichrist, and you can quote that verse, is being used for God's wrath, then that whole program why would he use his wrath on his own? We have to either be
That's
protected
right.
or we're not around. But there's also that view that we somehow, for example, like whether it's the scorpions or, bites, we're just protected. Kind of like, the Egyptians, when things were happening, it wasn't affecting them. So you could envision a system where it's like, whatever you want to believe, if we are here, if all of a sudden something happens and you're like, oh, darn, I was wrong. You know what I mean? It's like, this is on and I'm still here, and things are going on. At least you know that things that are going to come down, you're going to be protected from his wrath. Not persecution, not tribulation, but his wrath. So maybe explain your view on when wrath begins, because I thought that was very fascinating.
Right. So just before we discuss the wrath, what you need to understand is the prophetic program has an element to it that just before God's kingdom breaks into the earth, there's a time of God's wrath and fury. And that's all talked about in the book of Joel. And part of that is the Antichrist, right? So in Isaiah chapter 10, it says, O Assyrian, the rod of my anger, the staff of my indignation, or my wrath. So clearly a reference to the Antichrist when you read it. And so the Antichrist comes to the earth as a judgment on the earth, specifically on the nation of Israel, to cause them to essentially kill those of them who take his mark and pledge their obedience to him. And it creates a.
What do you think that mark? Sorry to interject, but what do you think that mark is? I'm curious. Where you're at?
Oh, the mark of the beast.
Yeah.
I think I would have used to teach that had something to do with like the Islamic Shahada. Or I think in some Islamic countries they wrap some Islamic scripture around their hands or their foreheads. I don't know. That's all speculative. But the fact of the matter is, it says in the book of Revelation that that the mark has the number of the name of a man, and that man is the Antichrist. And obviously, the Antichrist isn't here right now, so it's impossible to speculate further, other than to say that it's not here right now. And
do you think
and
it
I don't
possibly
believe
could be technological in the sense that you have to buy and sell? You can't buy and sell without having this thing. So, I mean, if you just understand the world, it's got to be a pretty sophisticated system that can't be forged easily.
Here's what I think might be the case, and
sure.
This is pure speculation.
I understand.
On my part.
We're not taking this as gospel or saying this is what
Sure.
you say. It's just having fun with it and saying, what do you think? Your opinion, Shawn's opinion.
Sure. I would say that my best guess is it could be a technological thing, or it could be a spiritual thing where when someone, let's say the Antichrist is Islamic in nature, perhaps in the future when someone takes the Shahada, a demonic creature will literally cause a mark to appear in your forehead or in your hand supernaturally, and that'll be how someone can identify as to whether or not you are a member of that Antichrist system, because you have this supernatural mark that is literally visible, that appears on your skin when you pledge your allegiance to the Antichrist. And that may be part of his power or his deception that deceives the whole world, because currently there are no miracles taking place in the world today, at least not on a worldwide scale that everyone in the world knows about.
Sure.
But can you imagine the power it would have? Because the Mormons go around, they say you'll feel like a burning in your bosom when you become a Mormon. Imagine if you could go around and say, hey, if you say the Islamic Shahada, a mark will appear on your hand when you do that. That would be extremely convincing. And I think that could be it.
So do you think he's Islamic just because of the beheading, or why do you actually, in your opinion, believe that it's going to be more tied to the Islamic religion?
It has more to do with the places of power that the Antichrist holds, like in the book of Daniel, where it talks about the various nations that he controls, and they're all Islamic nations today. So unless something radically changes in the world, let's say Islam falls and a new religion's introduced and it's adopted by all the Muslim countries, but I find that highly unlikely. So and also when the Bible gives us the definition of an Antichrist, he who denies the Father and the Son, that is the mantra of Islam, that
Correct.
God is not a father and God has no son. They
true.
control the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. They're the enemies of Jews and Christians. They claim the Bible's not true. They are the biggest enemies of the gospel throughout history. On and on it goes. So to me, it's sort of a no-brainer. I try not to say it with absolute certainty because it hasn't unfolded yet, but that appears to be the case.
What do you think about like the temple being rebuilt? Do you think that an Islamic figure will appear and say, "Hey, we just like Jews here for a while," and we're, even if they're lying, how's that going to go over? Because you do believe that the temple needs to be rebuilt, correct?
Yes. So if you read in Revelation chapter 11, it talks about that the outer court is given to the Gentiles. I could unpack Revelation 11. I find it one of the most fascinating verses in the New Testament. That would take an hour to go through. So I'll just quickly summarize. Sure. In the book of Revelation, God gives John a vision of the Temple Mount. It says that the outer court is given to the Gentiles, clearly a reference to the Dome of the Rock that's standing there today. He even gives a little mathematical clue. He gives 42 months or 1,260 days. Mm-hmm. And if you count from when the Dome of the Rock was erected in 688 and add 1,260 years to that, it takes you to 1948. And it says in Revelation 11 that not only is the outer court given to the Gentiles, but it says that they will, let me pull up the verse just so I don't want to quote it wrong, sure. But it basically says that the temple will be standing, that the Jews will have control of their temple, but the outer court is given to the Gentiles. So here, let me pull this up. Verse 2, I might as well read it from verse 1. So John says, "There was given me a reed like a rod. The angel stood saying, 'Rise, measure the temple of God.'" So there's a temple. "And the altar, and them that worship therein. And the court which is without the temple, leave out, and measure it not, for it's given to the Gentiles. And the holy city shall be tread under foot 42 months. And I will give power to my 2 witnesses. They shall prophesy 260 days, clothed in sackcloth." So anyways, it appears when in his vision he sees the temple. It's there in Jerusalem. The outer court's given to the Gentiles, and they've been given it and John knows how much time they're given it, for 1,260 days, which in prophecy, using the day-year principle, is 1,260 years. So, Israel took control of Jerusalem back in 1948, but they still gave that Temple Mount, at least the Dome of the Rock, to the Muslims, which appears to be what Revelation 11 is talking about or alluding to. Or it may actually have a double fulfillment, because the 1,260 days may actually be talking about how long the Antichrist has some dominion over there, because clearly the 2 witnesses haven't appeared yet.
Who do you think the 2 witnesses are? Curious about your view on that.
Sure. The Moses and Elijah theory is very interesting and certainly possible. There are certainly 2 men. As you read it, they get killed and then resurrected. So Moses and Elijah are probably my best guess. Yeah, I would say Moses and Elijah.
That's kind of what you think about that?
Yeah.
I'll have to send you a theory that's backed up by a few scriptures that will probably blow your mind. You probably have never heard it before, but it's
sure. Give me a quick overview if you can.
Well, I mean, it basically it's Zerubbabel and Yeshua, not Jesus, but the other guy, right? If you look at Zechariah 3:5 and compare it with Zechariah 4:11-14, right? Just do that. You're going to see that it's literally spelled out. It's just fascinating. I'm not even saying that I agree with it.
Interesting.
But look at Zechariah 3:5 and compare it with Zechariah 4:11-14. And then compare that with Revelations 11:4. That's all you got to do. Just remember those verses, Zechariah 3-5, Zechariah 4:11-14, and then compare the Zechariah to Revelations 11:4. It'll blow your mind. Like, it's one of those things.
I'll have to do that after.
Just do it. Just do it, and just tell me what you think. But you're kind of like, whoa, it's really fascinating, because you're like, could it have been there that easy? Everyone has these ideas, but you look at it and you're like, wait a minute, like that.
Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about the scripture.
It is
so many of the things that we think that we need to speculate about really are spelled out if you know where to look.
I'll be interested to hear what you have to say when you look at those.
I'll get
3
back
scriptures.
To you on that one.
Just get back to me on it and see what you think. I think it
would
be pretty amazing. But yeah, continue on. So then when you're getting into it, I'm just kind of interjecting based on you'll mention the 2 witnesses, and I'm like, oh, who do you think there? And you'll mention the Antichrist, and I'm like, do you think it's Islamic? So I like to kind of, fine tune it a little bit, so just because we can briefly go over it. Like,
listen, I don't pretend to have all my cards in a row or whatever the expression is. I know that there are some things I don't know about the scriptures, and so I'm always learning too.
Yeah, no, same here. And again, a lot of stuff when it comes to eschatology, I mean, it's not salvational. It's fun to discuss, but at the end of the day, we're still brothers. You know what I mean? So I think that's the most important thing, is to be like, hey man, we can disagree, we can, have difference of opinions, but hey man, we're still brothers in Christ, right? And I think that's what I try to emphasize on my show. I have a lot of different various guests on with different viewpoints. As long as the essentials are in place, you're a brother. We can argue and debate about all sorts of things, passionately, but at the end of the day, it's like, hey, this has been going on for thousands of years, right? People debating
Right.
back and forth. But I just find it fascinating. That's why, when I heard you debate with Kent, and then I'm like, wow, this is really fascinating. I never looked at it this way. So it was just interesting how you were bringing all this out. So getting back to your view on when does wrath begin, and why, do we avoid that? Why, scripturally,
Sure.
why are we not called to actually go through wrath?
One of the things I discussed with Kent in that discussion was how the canon of Scripture appears to be sovereignly selected by God, such that, so you've got Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Book of Acts, then gets interrupted by the Apostle Paul. Then his ministry continues for 13 books, the vast bulk of the New Testament. And then we return to a time where God is making a distinction between Jew and Gentile, because we have the book of Hebrews. And so the book of Hebrews, when you read it, deals with the nation of Israel again, and suddenly they're talking about covenants and conditions and spiritual gifts that we currently are not experiencing, and the end times. The end times again seem to be in view. And then you get to Peter, James, and John after the book of Hebrews, and they're all addressing if you read the first verse of any of their letters, they actually address the nation of Israel. The book of James says, I'm writing to the 12 tribes of Israel. And so Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and the Jewish epistles, Hebrews, James, John, Peter, Jude, and the book of Revelation, they are all geared towards the nation of Israel. And so the nation of Israel is the one who has to go through the rod of God's wrath. It talks about that in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 20:37. It says, I will cause you to pass under the rod, and I will bring you into the bond of the covenant, and I will purge out from you those who are unbelievers and those who transgress. And the word there, the rod, Ezekiel 20, is actually a reference, I believe, a cross-reference to Isaiah 10:5, which talks about the Assyrian, the rod of God's indignation. So they're going to pass under the Antichrist in order to purge out. He's essentially going to be a filter for filtering out the unbelievers in Israel, to sift them like wheat from tares, essentially. Mm-hmm. And that's, Jesus obviously talks about that too. So when you understand that Matthew 24 is dealing with the nation of Israel and them going through that time of tribulation so that they can be purged, God doesn't need to purge us today. God knows which are his through his Spirit. But the nation of Israel, you're going to have false professors, and you're going to have people who pledge themselves to the Antichrist. God's going to put them through this test to see if they truly believe that Jesus is the Messiah, by giving them essentially this false Messiah. And I don't think God is going to give us that time. We're not going to see that time, because Paul says that of the times and seasons that he doesn't need to write to us, because we don't belong to a time of darkness, which is what the book of Joel refers to as the time of tribulation, the day of darkness, the day of the Lord. That's not for us. Paul doesn't give us any warnings or admonitions for how we are to survive or behave during that time. All he says about it is, hey, don't even worry about it. You're not even of the times. I don't even to you. You to the day, you belong to the night. You belong to the light, not to the darkness. Don't even worry about it. That appears to be Paul's stance. But as soon as you get to the book of Hebrews, and then as you get further along to, like, say, John, when John's writing to the nation of Israel, he says, you've heard the Antichrist is coming, so now many Antichrists have come. And he says, if you read John again, he gives all these conditions that the nation of Israel has to do in order to endure to the end during this time. And one of the important things that they have to do is they have to provide for their brothers, because they're not going to be able to buy and sell. So those are the people who have food and drink need to actually feed their brethren. Otherwise, they're considered unbelievers. That's not something, not that we wouldn't do that today, but that's not a condition that Paul ever puts on us. Paul, what he says is, if you don't eat, if you don't work, you don't eat. He puts it on you to essentially feed yourself. Whereas in John's time, when he's dealing with the tribulation and the Antichrist and the end times, he actually specifically says in John's epistle that this is the last hour. Right? So John's writing to a future generation of the nation of Israel that's dealing with the Antichrist and the last hour just before Christ returns to the earth and sets up his kingdom. That's not Paul's message, and that's not Paul's group, and that's not Paul's time. And so if you make this division between Paul's ministry of the dispensation of the gospel of grace, where there's neither Jew or Gentile, And then you go to the book of Hebrews through Revelation, where there is a distinction between Jew and Gentile. It suddenly all makes sense that God is one day going to return to dealing with the nation of Israel. The dispensation of the grace of God will be over. He'll go back to dealing with them through law and covenants, just as was foretold, and the entire picture makes perfect sense.
So you had a really interesting way of looking at even the gifts, where it talks about you'll drink poison, or,
Right.
you can handle deadly animals. I thought this was very fascinating when you get into your eschatology. Maybe you can explain a little bit about that to the audience.
Right. So at the end of the book of Matthew, where it says that these signs will follow them that believe, they'll be able to drink, poison and not be harmed. They'll be able to get to handle deadly serpents, and even if they're bit, they'll be fine. Those sorts of things. And then in the book of Revelation, it talks about God poisoning all the waters on the earth, turning them all bitter, and then sending these scorpion-like locust creatures that are stinging all the inhabitants on the earth, so that they wish they were dead, but they can't die. All those sorts of things. It sounds like nightmarish imagery, but the Bible says it's going to happen, and we believe it is going to happen. But it says in Matthew that those that believe are protected from those things.
So you believe that's literal, right?
Yeah.
I would imagine that you believe that's literal. Yeah, okay, continue.
Yeah, I believe it's literal,
so
absolutely.
So do I.
Right, so obviously Paul never talks about those sorts of things because those are not happening today. But they will happen, and that's when those particular signs, which will begin in the nation of Israel, are going to take effect. And it specifically says that when you're baptized in water, I believe is, I'd have to pull up the verse in Matthew, but when Paul talks about baptism, he says there's one baptism for us today, and it's speaking of the baptism of the Holy Spirit baptizing us into Christ. Mm-hmm. And so there's words in the New Testament, there's words throughout the Bible that when we hear, we tend to associate with a particular thing. So when we hear the word baptism, we may have one particular view. Or when we hear the word gospel, we may think it only has one definition. Or even the word church. But if you actually do a word study on these words that we think have one definition, they actually have multiple uses throughout the Scripture at different times. So, for example, the word gospel or good news can refer to the gospel of the kingdom. It can refer to the gospel of grace, or even in the book of Revelation, there's the everlasting gospel, which an angel preaches throughout the earth. And these gospels are not the same thing. And you would, as a New Testament believer, we need to be conscious, very conscious of how these words are being used. Even the word baptism has multiple uses. In the Gospels, it talks about the baptism of water, it talks about the baptism of the Spirit, even talks about a baptism of fire, which I believe is a reference to judgment. And so we just need to be careful with wordage and not assume that when we see a word that we're familiar with, that it always means the same thing.
So
even
when
the word
we're baptized in the
Spirit,
when we're baptized into the Spirit, do you believe, and again, this is not salvational in my opinion, but do you believe as an act of obedience that we need to be water baptized or not?
No, I don't think water baptism is for today. I was baptized in water.
Okay.
I should mention, but I believe I did that because I didn't understand the Pauline New Testament, or rather the dispensation of the gospel of grace, whereby when we believe, as the book of Ephesians says, when we believe this gospel, we are marked with the Spirit. We are baptized with the Spirit in that moment. Whereas,
so you believe that the water baptism is only for the Jews?
I believe, yes. So they are to be a nation of priests who baptize, because I think baptism has some Old Testament symbology. Israel passing through the waters of the Red Sea, but also how before you go and meet a king, you're meant to have a ritual bath to be cleansed, because you're about to meet royalty. So I think it has something to do with before you enter the earthly kingdom. Baptism is a necessary act of obedience, a bodily cleansing to identify with that kingdom. And we don't preach that kingdom. And like I've mentioned already, I don't believe that we are members of the earthly aspect of that kingdom. So no, I don't think water baptism is for us today. Paul even says, I thank God that I baptized none of you, for Christ sent me not to baptize. So how can Paul say that if baptism or water baptism is part of his message? Paul makes it clear that it's not part of his message.
So nowhere in Paul's messaging does he ever talk about being baptized.
I'm not saying that
in water in that sense.
Right. I'm not saying that he doesn't. What I am saying is that as you read his epistles, he makes a clear point to point out that he was not sent to baptize, and when he thanks God that he didn't baptize, the reason he says that is he says it so that the cross of Christ doesn't. Let me actually pull up the verse.
Sure.
Yeah, so 1 Corinthians 1:14 says, "I thank God I baptize none of you, but Cyprus and Gaius, so that none of you can say you were baptized in my name." There's a whole study you have to do on why Paul baptized those two specific individuals. But then he goes on to say, "For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power." So Paul's emphasis is always on the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ for our salvation, not on baptism. But if you read Christ's commission to his disciples, where he says, "Go and baptize the nations," baptism, he did send them to baptize, and baptism was absolutely necessary. And if they're not baptized, then they don't get to experience all the benefits of the baptism, namely the things that says that these signs shall follow, such as the being able to drink deadly things and be stung by dangerous scorpion-like animals and all those sorts of things. So, yeah, I hope I.
So you think so? That's referencing, in your opinion, based on Revelation. So when you read those verses, you're saying this is to come at a later date. This has never happened before. There's never been a time when they've drank poison or handled deadly animals.
Well, even Paul was bit by a viper, and it had no effect on him. But I don't believe today, like, those snake handling churches, and they claim that this is for them today, and obviously people end up dead. So,
correct.
No, I don't think. And when Paul speaks about the gifts, so the early church was experiencing an influx of spiritual gifts before the New Testament was complete. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason for that was because they're essentially the training wheels of the early church. They didn't have the New Testament fully written. Not every gathering of believers in the early first century had access to New Testament scriptures because a lot of them hadn't been written yet. So they were given prophetic gifts, visions, dreams, gifts of tongues, and various other spiritual gifts.
Shawn, sorry to interrupt. We're gonna be coming to the top of the hour here on the radio show, and we'll just take it up on YouTube for the after show. But before the radio audience, before the show ends, if you can just kind of mention a couple of links where people can get a hold of you, or information, or some things you want to promote or you're working on. Now is your time.
Sure. All right, so yeah, we're working on a new Christian TV show called Quantum with the director of Genesis Paradise Lost, so you could certainly go check those out. And if you check me out on YouTube, I've got a YouTube channel, so youtube.com/VenomFangX. And you said you would post some links that I could give you later if people wanted to check out some. Like if they're interested in the study on mid-acts Pauline dispensationalism, I could give you some websites and YouTube channels that I've been following.
I'll put them in the description, and also the old videos or whatever, the classic. You got to put that up because a lot of people are asking about that. So you can just get a link to that. We can put that in the description. Maybe just right after the show, send it to me, and I'll just update I'll update it. But yeah, I just wanted to give some time here before the radio portion of it ends. Anything else that you want to mention?
I think that's it.
Okay, well, let's go into a little bit just in closing before we hit the end of the program. Just certain things that kind of are on your heart, what you're kind of working on as far as anything else that you're studying outside of what we're talking about here in the second hour. Anything else that you're kind of moving towards or you're fascinated with? Maybe let's just get real quick. Where do you stand on where things are at? Do you think we're close? And what I mean by close, do you think that there's generations left, or we possibly could be, in the last generation?
Right. I don't think it's possible to say. If you had asked me even a year ago, I would have said, yeah, we're right here at the end. Yeah. But the biggest clue, I'd say, is where it talks about in the Old Testament that after 2 days or after 3 days, he'll raise us up. So there appears to be a 2-day window, or, a day is as 1,000 years. So a 2,000 years of Israel being fallen. And then on the third day, he raises us up. So I think we're getting close based on that. But I honestly don't know.
What are you looking for? What are you looking for that would be kind of an indicator?
What would you
have to see And again, remember, this is just all your opinion. This is,
Mm-hmm.
we're not saying this is like doctrine, just saying overall.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something certain, events, something that needs to take place where you're like, oh, okay, I personally believe that we're really close now?
Well, that's the thing. If you understand that Paul's letters are for us today, Paul doesn't really give us any indication other than we're expecting to be gathered to Christ, and that's what we're looking for, and that can happen at any time. And as soon as that happens, God will go back to dealing with the nation of Israel. So I don't know when. It could happen now. It could happen. I don't know. I can't even speculate. But we all just need to be ready for it.
Appreciate your time tonight on Revolution Radio. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And we'll be back same time, same place. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. Good night, everyone. Blessings to you. All right, we're back and we're on YouTube doing the after show. Obviously, we had some technical things that happened beforehand. Shawn wasn't able to get on in time, but we were now able to bring him on and do a bit of an after show and kind of go into some stuff here for the YouTube audience exclusively. So really glad that you were able to stick around a little bit. I know it's late for you in your time zone. I think you're in Eastern. So
yes,
I'm in Mountain. But anyways, you were explaining, so based on those events, for you, it's just like instantly it just happened because the entire timetable for Revelations is for Israel only, correct?
That's right. And if you look at the salvation of Paul, so Jesus just unexpectedly appeared to him, boom, from heaven. And I think it's going to be the same thing. Unannounced, a complete mystery, without any prophetic signs or any of that. Prophecy and signs, those belong to the Jews and their prophetic program. We are a mystery that began with Paul, and the same way it began is the same way it's going to end. That we're just going to be, Christ is just going to make a sudden appearance from heaven, and we're going to be with him in the clouds, and there will be no precedent signs or ways to expect it.
So basically, to be absent from the body, to be present with the Lord. Just instant, like basically, and then also the program, you're not sure 100% if we'll partake in anything on earth, but we possibly could. But for the most part, that's all for Israel. That's all for
I believe
that
so.
program. Correct.
Based on what I've been learning, based on my rereading of the New Testament with this particular view in mind, I think that is correct. Yes.
And so have you ever stopped and thought about, the entire, 1,000-year reign, why Satan's let out again? Have you ever really questioned that? Because I'm puzzled. I still really don't understand the full, program where it's like, ta-da, 1,000-year reign, and the whole thing. And then all of a sudden it's like, but after 1,000 years, you know what I mean? Like this last little ditch effort. Do you ever kind of look into that and wonder and scratch your head and go, why?
Oh yeah, it's fascinating for sure. It appears that even though Christ is on the earth, man is still man. Mm-hmm. His nature has not changed, so there's still a fallen aspect to man. So even though Christ is on the earth ruling and reigning, the fact is men still will resent him. Mm-hmm. They will still want to take an opportunity when presented to them to throw off his government and be free to live in sin and have all the sinful pleasures that he currently has in the current age. And so it appears it's similar to what's going to happen with Israel and the Antichrist. God's going to give them an opportunity to make a choice, and apparently a lot of them or most of them are going to make a very bad one.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on that. It just seems so bizarre. But do you think they're going to be constantly plotting to try to kill him?
That's maybe not, because Satan's loosed and he deceived, and so I believe prior to that, the nations, I guess, are not deceived. So most of them appear to understand that Jesus is the Lord, and you don't want to mess with him, because if you do, you'll be destroyed. So that.
But they have to go into the city, I think, once a year, correct? Like they're not allowed
That's
in.
Right.
Only once a year they have to kind of pay homage or something like that, correct?
Right. There appears to be this procession that occurs where they're allowed in, and they walk through this. Essentially I'm not sure if it's quite like a parade or whatever, but they walk through the gates and then they come in one end and they come out the other, and they have to do that, or they receive no rain or no blessings.
So, but that would be more of a forced kind of submission. So I can't see that there would be a lot of joy in people's hearts. You think based on a sinful nature, these people aren't going to be too happy. I think they'd be plotting the whole time, or you know what I mean? Like, okay, maybe here's our chance.
Sure.
Like again, it's no force for him, but I'm just saying overall, there's still men, right? It's not
That's
taken
right.
away. It's not like their sinful nature is taken away or whatever you want to look at. So the
Right.
question is, what's really going on? It's fun to speculate, but really you have to look at it and say, well, okay, but that's forced submission. It's like, if you don't do this, you don't get no rain, you're not eating, I don't think that's going to make people too happy. I mean, but they can't
Right.
do anything about it.
Well, think about this. So imagine having a conversion experience where you are a sinful man, but you come to faith in the Lord, and you have that similar to our own experience today, where you have a change of heart, and then you love the Lord. And so there's going to obviously be people like that too. But it's similar to people who are raised in privilege and they don't really appreciate what they have. People who've never seen the world as it is today, who are born into the millennial kingdom, who don't understand how good they have it. I could see many of them just resenting their lack of freedom because they have these evil desires and they want to be able to indulge in them, and they can't because Christ's governments will be so all present that you literally can't get away with anything.
So in the context of the end program where all of a sudden you've got, and again, I think you would agree that the 144,000 are from the 12 tribes, that those are indeed Jewish people, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So would you say in that sense, though, with that program overall, do you think that the Jews themselves, a part of that program at that point would pretty much, it's a truthful statement to say that they're God's chosen people?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, if you read in Zechariah, there's a prophecy where it talks about the nations, 10 Gentiles will grab the hems of one Jew saying, let us go with you. We heard that God is with you. And so, God's chosen people in the past and in the future is the nation of Israel. That is how they are his vessel for how he will rule the world.
So the Gentile believers, and I'll call them that, I'm still toying with this whole idea of when you get saved, are you a Gentile anymore? I have a hard time believing that, Gentile, if you kind of look it up, it's outside of covenant with Yahweh, right? So to be a believing person outside of the covenant of Yahweh, there's something weird there. So obviously I know that we're adopted into the body, into the family, but overall this whole idea that we don't transform into a new creature, that we're not a Gentile anymore. Gentile is usually not a good term. You know what I mean? It's like they're preaching to Gentiles, but also what happens when all of a sudden they get saved? Are they a Gentile at that point? I agree with you that there's still a special provision there, but are they classified a Gentile?
It depends on at which time you ask that question. So during Old Testament, when Israel was a nation, a proselyte to Israel, a Gentile believer, they'd be given, I guess, citizenship in the nation of Israel, and so you could call them, in a sense, a member of the nation itself. But I think they were still considered by the Jews, at least, to be a Gentile. As to whether or not God viewed them that way, I'm uncertain. They certainly couldn't serve in the temple in positions of that were exclusively for the members of Israel, but they were still reconciled to God and considered part of that nation. Whereas today, because there is no Jew or Gentile in today's dispensation, you and I come from a Jewish family. That gives me no additional standing or privileges with God in this dispensation.
Correct. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. No, I do. I understand that just because you were born Jew. You know what I mean? Like it says, those that are Israel, not all Israel are Israel. Like there are verses that clearly spell out that just because you're born a Jew doesn't mean that you're a house of Israel, that type of thing, right? There's that whole separation that goes on. I'm just saying that you look at it like there's two separate programs, but there's neither Jew nor Gentile in Christ.
Certainly, and then it talks about in the fullness of times that all things, whether it be in heaven or on earth, will be in Christ ultimately. And so I think at that point, will the distinctions between Israel and Gentile, will those be of any importance? I don't think they will be. What will matter is whether you are a member of the heavenly aspect or the earthly aspect of the kingdom.
Correct. And I think you believe that the Jews would not judge. They wouldn't judge angels, but you're saying the Gentile believers would, or both would?
Oh, no. What I believe is that Israel will rule and reign on the earth, and so they will judge the Gentile nations.
Okay.
And that the body of Christ, Paul's group, will judge angels.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's what I'd heard before. You had that differentiation that one's kind of an earthly rule, one's kind of more of a heavenly rule in the angelic sense, right? So basically, Israel then they don't participate in any of the angelic authority. They just,
that's right, correct.
And so you believe that they would exist for eternity on earth in the new heavens and the earth, in the sense that they just exist forever on earth with Christ?
Yeah, so that New Jerusalem, which is clearly a material city that comes down from heaven to a new earth, and they live in that new city. And then there's that interesting verse, I think it's in Isaiah, where it says his kingdom will have no end. The increase of his government will have no end. So it appears that they'll still be having children, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. I did, but we won't.
But we won't.
Okay.
Exactly. So the heavenly realm is fixed forever, has a specific number, whereas the earthly realm perhaps continues to expand indefinitely. And so that would be yet another distinction between the heavenly aspect and the earthly aspect of God's kingdom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's like I said, it's very fascinating looking at that, and just kind of, trying to structure it all in your mind and understanding. So then after that 1,000...
Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but another thing that just came to my mind. So when you look at the New Jerusalem, one thing that becomes an object of interest is the tree of life. It says it's there in the New Jerusalem for the healing of the nations. But if we're resurrected, incorruptible, unable to die, why do we need the tree of life? I don't think we do. But the people who live in the New Jerusalem, they do. Right, so there does appear to be a distinction between this. As Paul says, there are heavenly bodies and there are earthly bodies, and it appears that in the resurrection and in the fullness of times, there are those who have heavenly bodies that are, fit for heaven, and then there are those with earthly bodies who they'll still live forever. There's no mortality anymore, but there appears to be a need for the tree of life in order to maintain an earthly immortality.
And so what's the tree of life?
Well, it appears to be a tree, because it says that it yields different fruit every month and all that, and its leaves are for the healings of the nations. Some people make the tree of life out to be symbolic of other things, but I think it's probably what it says it is. It's probably a literal tree.
Yeah, and you're saying that basically why would it be there if, we're resurrected in that sense, right?
If we're resurrected immortal such that we need no sustenance and we cannot die, I don't see a need for a tree of life for healing. It doesn't. That to me doesn't make sense.
That's true. But you're saying the only reason is because you got to remember there's going to be people that are resurrected to rule on earth, right? I'm talking about Israel, like these old figures. So in a sense, why would they need the tree of life if all of a sudden they've been resurrected to life? You know what I mean? Are they resurrected? But that's kind of, it's sticky because again, would they not have like a new kind of glorified body at that point? Or you just think they'd be resurrected and they'd just be walking around like just regular human?
Yeah, that's the thing. So the question is, and Paul has asked this question, how are the dead raised? And so he goes to quite a bit of length to explain that there are different bodies, and some are heavenly and some are earthly. And so we tend to assume that all bodies that are resurrected, glorified, and all that. Yeah. But one question I ask is, when Christ was resurrected to his earthly body, and he says, don't touch me for I have not yet ascended to my Father, could it be that he was resurrected to a mortal body, but it was glorified at his ascension? Is that possible? And if that's the case, then it is possible that the dead who are raised on the earth actually remain in an earthly body, and perhaps they are not glorified ever. I mean, I don't know. It could be that in the fullness of time, all things are glorified. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's something that
these are things that you can just speculate about, because the question sometimes comes like, what age will you be? I mean, not that there's an age, but like at what point, right? Is there going to be a ton of old people walking around? You know what I mean? They live pretty old in the Bible days.
Some people have.
It's going to be like a whole senior citizen home. You know what I mean? It's going to be like a old age home or something. Like all these people running around New Jerusalem.
Yeah, and you think of children who died. Are they going to be resurrected as children and all that? No, we don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us.
Yeah, like I said, fun to speculate. Like these are kind of those things where you kind of like, you just kind of speculate, but no one really knows, right? I mean,
I remember having a discussion in back in college. This subject came up. There was some women present, and they were wondering if they're going to be everyone was going to be resurrected male, because it says we're all conformed to the image of Christ. So is everyone in the resurrection male, similar to how all the angels are male? That came up, and then someone else said maybe we're all resurrected female. Maybe, and anyways, all speculative.
We're all
unknown.
Resurrected female. I wouldn't see where that could be biblically
I don't either. But someone said that. I'm just.
Oh no, I hear you. I'm not
debating.
Oh yeah, I'm not debating. I'm just like, that one's way out there left field. You know this, but even all becoming male, it just seems so. It seems so foreign. You know what I mean? It would be like, what would be the point of, like, you know, that whole relational aspect, and all of a sudden, boop, you know what I mean? Everyone's male. You know, I think with the angels, I mean, you got to remember, they're completely different and separate from what God did with humans, you know, with breathing the breath of life and all these sort of things.
That's right.
And then even just let us make man in our image, right? And then taking
male and female.
Yeah, of course. But the whole idea that he, you know, I think, you know, that's a clear reference of the Godhead. Let us make man in our image, right?
Yes, so, I think that's well understood.
And I don't think he did that with the angels, right?
No, of course not.
You know, and I think that that's kind of the whole battle that we're in. I think Satan, demons, whatever, fallen angels, I mean, they just hate us, you know? I used to tell that to Satanists all the time. Like, you don't understand. Like, you know, I had the mentality like, hey, if I went and worshiped Satan, and you know, wouldn't I be like second in charge in hell? Like, wouldn't he be so proud of me? But I mean, he hates me, regardless whether I serve him or not.
That's right.
You know, so I've explained that to a lot of people, you know, with that context and stuff. So is there any, I guess outside of this, is there any other religions or things that you've been fascinated to learn more about? Like, obviously, we were talking a little bit about Islam, and you did a lot there. Have you kind of followed that? Just kind of keep an eye on it? I've said this, Shawn, many times on my show. I think two of the greatest threats to the church are homosexuality and Islam. Because what I've seen, what they are able to do with the laws, is frightening. Not to mention that I think just based on numbers, and especially with Islam, I think that there was a great video that went around, and it just talked about, like, by this date, you know, this is going to be completely, you know, overrun just based on population. Based on the fact that the average person, I think that to sustain a population, you have to have about like a 2.3 children or something, you know, and on average,
there's that video where it shows that Muslims are having six to nine children per family.
You've seen the video.
Yeah, we've all seen that.
But we're not sustaining without having immigration. We would just kind of implode. Right. Like, we're having like 1.2. I think America and Canada was like no better. It was like 1.3. So yeah, and they're on average having 6, 7. So based just on that, it showed in Europe that Europe would be completely Islamic, taken over by a certain time. And we're talking like 2035, 2040. It's coming up fast, you know. So based on those numbers, but based on, you know, what they will do with their Sharia law and that type of thing, would you agree that those are major threats coming to the world?
Absolutely. Absolutely they are. And I mean, I live in Canada, and I've got tons of Muslim neighbors, so they're everywhere, and they are spreading. And as far as homosexuality, well, if Islam takes over, then I guess that's not something you have to worry about. So, you know, they'll stone them all to death.
Well, and that's the interesting thing. I think it's almost like, you know, they'll kind of play together for a while until all of a sudden, it's almost like, I think it says in the Quran, it's almost like, you know, if you are the minority, make peace, but once you have the majority, make war, right?
Yeah, I mean, and that's Muhammad's pattern, right? Yes. So early in his ministry, if you want to call it a ministry, he was very peaceful. He was getting along with everyone, and then as he progressed, he became essentially a warlord. And eventually, the last thing he said to his followers was, you know, I've been commanded to make war essentially with the world until the entire world is subjugated, you know, under Islam. So.
So you definitely do think that it's definitely a big part of the end times program that Islam will play a huge part in that, right?
Yes, strongly. That.
I know that even in 2006, 7, when you kind of came on the scene, and you know, obviously had your stance when it came to, you know, obviously looking at, you know, same-sex marriage and all these type of things. But did you ever think in your wildest dreams that it would come to a point where people were questioning their own sex, like in the sense of male and female? Like, did that blow you away? Because it did for me. I mean, I saw a lot of things coming down the pike sexually, but I never saw questioning if you're a male or not. Like, did you?
Sure, I've never experienced that, but sure. I mean, gender dysphoria is a mental illness, and people definitely have experienced that. So my heart goes out to them. That must be an awful thing to experience. You know, if you
well,
feel like
such
there's
an
a
attack on the
disparity.
created order. It's such an assault. I mean, it's one thing, the perversion, you know, of sexuality and going that direction, and we see the scripture, but really just getting into the hone of just who God created you to be and questioning that, saying no, you know, there was mistakes here. You know, I don't feel like a man, I feel like a woman, or vice versa, and then getting to the point where people start cutting off their body parts.
Yeah, it's truly it's an illness, is what it is. I can't think of another word for it. It's,
but what
it's
other
very
illnesses?
sad.
What other illnesses get parades? And here's a question for you: what other sin do you know that have great parades? Like, I've never seen the murder parade. You know, I've never seen the adultery parade.
That's a fair point.
Yeah, like it's
a fair
amazing
point.
in our culture that they literally celebrate it, and that to me is so alarming, because there's something different. I personally think, you know, there's a natural way for man to sin. That is getting into territory where you're getting an unnatural, like you're outside the realm of normal sinning, if that makes sense, right? I always kind of, you know, debate on the whole thing where it's like God, you know, in Romans, God gave them over 3 times, almost like, you know, with Pharaoh, where he kept hardening his heart.
Right.
Well, when
and
you
then
see
Romans specifically narrows it in on homosexuality.
100%. And so I'm not saying that a homosexual could not be saved. What I'm saying is, if you get to that point where you're basically completely, you know, just taken over in the sense that he's given you over, and you get to that state where it's just, there's no point of return. I'm always curious to wonder if you get to that reprobate level, you know, what happens in that state, because it's a fearful thing to be completely, you know, given over, and it's God doing it. He's done with you. It's almost like a saturation point, you know, when it talks about the cup of wrath, where you can kind of build it up, where all of a sudden you're cut off. I'm always curious, based on that. I don't know kind of where you stand on that, but do you think that there's an element, and again, it's hard for any of us to ever know. So I would never be the type of person that I would know where they're at. I'm just saying, in God's view, could there be at a point where you're completely done? There is no chance at that point.
Here's what I would say. So if you read Paul's letters, Romans is his first, and Romans begins in Romans 1 addressing exactly what you're saying, which is the point at which someone has gone basically as far as they can go is now they're engaging in homosexual activity. And that's his Paul's launching pad for his gospel. You know, and his emphasis is always this exceeding abundant grace. So it seems like God, who has now given Israel over to unbelief. The Gentiles were already in unbelief. Israel's now in unbelief. The whole world is now in unbelief. They're doing whatever it is they want to do. Homosexuality is rampant. And from that's God's starting point. Man is lost. He's depraved. He's sick. And now from that state, God's going to save people. And that's his exceeding abundant grace. And obviously, we've heard many stories of homosexuals coming to faith and repenting and all that.
Yeah, no, 100%. So, and I think, but again, I had someone on the show a few weeks back, and this was a person that was transgender, was in the lifestyle for years, and, you know, set free. But he told me that, you know, through that, and even in conversations with a lot of others, they weren't happy. They knew something was up deep down inside. You know what I mean? It's like when you take that mask off, almost. It was like, you know, I'm talking about the one that's completely sold out. They have like their whole conscience has been seared, 110%. Yeah. I mean, they do not care. And if anything, they get to the point where they're just blasphemous, where they're like, you know, you see a lot of these things happening in these parades where they're like, you know, taking pokes at Jesus, right? In very blasphemous manner. And you're wondering at that point, not that they couldn't be redeemed, but at a certain point, you get to a point of just so far gone, of a natural state. That's my point, is when you get into territories, when you get into like bestiality and all these things, you get so far off in depravity that you're almost just, your conscience is seared at that point. And I'm saying you have no remorse, and you don't have any guilt, and you don't have any conscience left. I'm saying an individual like that, you know, I would highly question that they might have got to that point of no return.
Paul doesn't really talk about there being a point of no return. If there was a point of no return, Paul would have been, you know, he wasn't just mocking.
What do we do with Romans when where else in the Bible do you see God giving people over? Like literally at that point, he's now entering in, and he's giving them over 3 times in that verse. He gave them over, he gave them over, he gave them over. And then what happened afterwards? Now, I agree with you, Shawn, that not, you know, just because someone's doing that, a lot of times they're confused or they're whatever in life. I'm talking about someone that basically just completely goes to that state. Is it possible? I'm not, you know, I would never be able to judge someone and know where they're at. But is it possible? We do know that cup of wrath can be filled to the top, and it's done. I mean, You know, we do know there are verses like that. I guess it comes to the context, you know, who are we talking about? Are we talking about the Gentile program for you or Israel? You know, maybe I should say, can you be cut off completely, you know, if you are, you know, not part of that? You know, I'm not sure. Again, these are just things I'm just throwing out there. I'm just always been curious about that verse because it's so specific and it's the only time you see this, you know, where's the grace in that? You know, he's actually allowing them to get even more depraved at that point. Like, so that they would do things that ought not to be done. But it's like, without God intervening, would they have got to that point?
Sure. Well, he seems to be building an argument in Romans, right? So he begins by saying, this is man's condition, that man is just going further and further away from God into sin. God has given them up. He's abandoned them so that they do whatever it is they want to do. They are sinful. And he essentially says that this is not just the Gentiles, this is the Jews too. So everyone's doing this. And homosexuality is just a proof that this is the case, that man is depraved. He never says that now you can't be saved. True. He says that from this state of depravity, this is what God's working with now.
Sure.
But as a warning to people, sure, it could be prudent to say, look, if you go down this path, and you go into total depravity, you might go too far to the point where, not necessarily that if you had believed the gospel you can't be saved. No, you can be saved. Of course you can. But it may be the case that you are so hard of heart that when you hear the gospel, you're not going to believe it and you will die in your sins. So there is something to be said about warning people about living a life of, you know, complete abandon and just going straight into sin. And there are consequences to that, and some of those consequences for some people certainly are eternal, that they never do come to faith and they are lost.
So do you believe that God can, so here, I'll sum this up. Do you believe that God chooses his people, or do his people choose him?
That is a good question.
Yeah.
So there are verses, you know, where it talks about, you know, the Romans road, where it says, you know, those whom he called, he justified, those whom he justified, he glorified, the golden chain of redemption. Right. So there are hints in the scripture of God choosing individuals, and
well, let's look at Paul. Like, did Paul choose?
No, certainly not. Paul didn't choose.
So let's just talk about your understanding of these two different programs. So let's just stop right now and say, well, we know that, here's the thing, this was my argumentation. Jews never chose God. He chose them as his chosen people, right? So we know that. So, but you would, even in your understanding, go even further, because if Paul was the beginning of this new program,
and he's the pattern.
He is the pattern. He had absolutely no say whatsoever in what happened to him on the road to Damascus.
That's exactly right. So yes, I'd say exactly what you just said is a very strong argument for the idea that it is God who chooses, and he does it sovereignly, and man's will has no say in the matter. It's God sovereignly choosing who he will save and when. However, it does say that there is there is the need for faith, that faith comes. Well, you could also argue that faith is a gift from God too. There's a verse that says that as well.
Yeah, so I don't need to get into it. I don't want to get into a debate and get into the topic, you know, predestination and reformed and all that type of stuff. I was just curious, you know, because what you brought up, I'm just like, where do you stand on that? And I know there's always complexities and it's not so easy, but overall, you either veer on one side or the other, right? And this has been.
Here's the thing. I've always been confused as to why it's so important to try and figure out how that works, other than to exalt the sovereignty of God, which I'm all for.
I think one gets very, very God-centered. The other one gets very man-centered. If you follow them to their logical conclusions, pretty much, I mean, boasting enters in pretty easily if you start looking at, like, hey, man, I look at my neighbor, I'm like, what's up with my neighbor? Like, what made me so special that I chose, you know, him at age 21? The fact of the matter was, I wouldn't have chosen him if you paid me. I mean, I hated him. I didn't want anything to do with religion. It was like, wham. And he just, like, I mean, he floored me, right? In my own life.
And that's certainly my experience too, right? So, like, I wasn't a believer one day, and then the next day I'm a believer. How else can that be explained other than God did something?
Are you and I smarter than our neighbors? I mean, are we are we designed a bit different, that we would hear that voice and the other people are deaf and dumb and blind? Like, that's my whole point here is, like, it's really complex topic, but really one gets completely, like, you're so in awe and you're so thankful because, like, I had nothing to do with this. Zero. Why? You know, like, I think you're almost more grateful.
That was certainly Paul's experience. And
it's certainly mine as well too. I know it's a controversial topic, but really, if you stop and think about it, I mean, what raged why even the Catholic Church split is because it got so, on the other side of this discussion, right? Where, the Reformation incurred. It wasn't just about these points that, Calvin, Martin was putting up onto the door. Really, if you start seeing where it went and you look at even Catholicism, you see a very works-centered, you got to do penance, you got to do this. Where the other one was like, we don't do anything. But then there was that hyper level where it's like, you don't have to do anything. And I disagree with that as well. I think that your evidence, like your fruit almost, you will know for a fact if you're born again or if you're a new creature, because you'll think different. You'll
That's right.
Everything will change, and it might be a progression, but you'd be able to analyze someone over, say, a decade, and you would be able to see very clearly that someone was changing, that they were, they might not be perfect, but again, they're definitely something is working within them.
There is no question. Paul makes it clear that we are new creatures, and that it is a new creation of God, and it's God who works in us to will and to do His good purpose. So there is absolutely no question that God sovereignly is acting, and without God's activity in salvation, we would be lost, and there's no question about that.
So I guess in wrapping up, because I know it's late for you, what's your plans for any debates? Like, I obviously doing that one with Kent, I was just curious, like, are you planning to actually debate more people, moving forward? You're highly skilled at it. And, I think it's always needed, depending on, where you are called to go. But is that something that you're interested in doing at some level? Maybe not to the point you were doing it back in 2006, 2007, but, at some level, do you think you're going to engage in debates again?
It's a good question. I did send out an email to, I think his name's Matt Dillahunty. He had a TV show or something called The Atheist Experience. So I sent him an email asking him if he wanted to debate, and so I'm waiting to hear back from him. So yeah, I'm interested in debating. I've always been open to that. But maybe. Right now, my YouTube channel hasn't been active in some time, so many people don't know who I am. At least, old people, not old people as in their age, people who were back on YouTube in 2007 know who I am, but newer YouTubers probably have no idea. So it'll take me a while before I can build up the clout that anyone will want to take the time to debate. Well, if you're
interested, I know, not me personally, but, I definitely know people that sit on the other end of the spectrum. Maybe it's the pre-trib thing. Maybe it's, the whole Torah, the whole Gentile Jew thing. I know that there's a lot of people that believe we've been grafted in differently than what you might think. But if you're open to it, I can definitely give you a bit more of a platform in debating people that I believe that will be very civil with you. You know what I mean?
Sure. I'd be interested in that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I just wanted to know because, I'm not interested in viciousness and all that. If you kind of look through my channel or just like kind of time being on YouTube, I've always taken a very softer approach and saying, hey, look, man, at the end of the day, we're going to have this debate, but he's still a brother. Treat him as such,
Yeah, usually my debates in the past have been with unbelievers, but having discussions, in-house discussions with believers does sound like fun.
Yeah,
and would be good for.
Yeah, I think it would be good, and I think that obviously I would give you a heads up, and you could kind of have some time to prepare. But I have been thinking, down the road about doing more of those things, whether I just moderate or whatever. But I just think it's really good for people to see brothers having a good debate, but then also loving each other as well. Like that's the whole thing. It's like having that respect. Like you and Kent, you obviously fully disagree. It'll be interesting to see what happens when he comes back to you with the information you gave him. Because he's like, whoa, like you don't see that much with Kent.
Yeah, Kent didn't seem too interested. In fact, like halfway through, he just sort of bowed out. So I don't know if it was because he doesn't like my presentation style, or maybe I dominated the conversation a little too much and should have let him speak more. I don't know. But
I got the sense. I got the sense from it that he just generally had a certain amount of time. Like, was it structured as you are doing a debate, or was it structured more like gonna come on board? You know what I mean? Like, how was it structured?
No, it wasn't. It was just pitched as a discussion. It was never meant to be a debate of any kind.
I thought he was very fascinated. He's like, wow, I haven't heard that before. It's interesting. I didn't get the sense at all with Kent that trust me, I know when Kent will not want to entertain nothing. Trust me, I've seen it. In different communities where all of a sudden we've approached Kent, not myself personally, but where others have said, hey, I'll have a debate, and he just I did not get that sense when he was talking to you, and also, I mean, you highly respect him, and you're calling him Dr. Hovind, you know what I mean? So he's not gonna bow out from someone that highly respects him. And quite honestly, I mean, he was so influential in your life, and he knows that too, right? You had said
I hope
that.
so. I hope he knows that, but he's a busy man, and part of Kent's, I guess, presentation style is, he goes into these repetitive patterns where he's rehearsed his, he's very rehearsed. And so when he's being introduced to a new idea where he hasn't got if you watch that discussion, he repeats a few of his points over and over again, and doesn't have anything new to essentially respond with. And so I feel like he kind of shut down a little. And
well,
just
probably,
sort of
to be fair, he had no
routine.
time to prep. He had no idea that topic was even going to come up, right?
Yeah.
I just got that he was like not out of his league, but again, I think anyone, to tell you the truth, bringing that up would be thrown for a curveball unless they had, time to prep.
That's fair.
Yeah,
that's fair. I sort of went away a little disappointed. I just felt like I disappointed in myself, not in Kent. I love the man, but I was just disappointed because I felt like had I presented it differently, or if I had allowed him more time to breathe and respond and sort of think it through rather than me just sort of dumping tons of information on him, maybe that would have been a better way. So I hope he looks into the emails I sent him, and because I did send him some links to look into this some more. I hope he looks into it and responds to it.
Well, I'd be really interested, and again, you can kind of maybe think about this, but we talking about different doctrines, but I'd be very interested if you're open and willing at some point to have a debate on cosmology. I think that might be very fascinating if you're willing to kind of just sit down and just have a debate on your side versus someone else's. But I think that you'd be a good person to have that. We've tried even with Kent, and he just he won't do it. But give it some prayer and thought on that. But I think that we could set something up where it might turn out to be pretty good. It's like iron sharpens iron, and you might actually look at it and going, this is interesting. Just like I gave you that verse tonight just to look into. And I'm not saying you have to believe it, just look into it, because it might just hit you and you're like, oh wow, like that was there the whole time. I think a lot of times, if someone's open enough just to look at it, something might happen. But quite honestly, I am in no position to change your thinking.
My friend Daniel, he's gone hard into the whole flat Earth thing, and he's tried to convince me on numerous occasions.
You know what? Is it? I think I know what Daniel you're talking about.
Daniel Johnson?
Yes, of course. I know Daniel was in Scientism Exposed. I mean, I think you had watched the first one. I don't know if you watched it, but I reached out to you very, I don't know, maybe 3 years ago, and you had got back to me and said it was well done, but I had sent it to you. I said, a huge fan, worked on this documentary, and then I reached out to you afterwards and said, are you willing to work on something maybe down the road? And you said, yeah, I'd be willing to. But I did send you that, so you would have saw Daniel in it. I did Scientism Exposed, and I don't mention the topic once in it. I go through evolution, I go through just kind of how scientism versus science, but I never in Scientism Exposed ever say the two words. So it is fascinating. But Daniel was a big part of that. But yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. So he's actually brought it up a few times to you then?
Yes, and okay. I'll just say this: I'm open to the idea. I'm still wrestling with it. Obviously, when you discover evolution's a lie, you lose a lot of faith in the scientific establishment.
Sure. And
so, could we be wrong about the shape of the Earth? It certainly is possible. It raises a lot of questions, certainly. Perhaps even more than evolution being false.
It's a doozy, and I just tell my fellow brothers and sisters, I say, listen, man, just take the time. If one thing that I can say is this is important, forget the shape of the Earth. Look at geocentrism versus heliocentrism. That's all you got to do. Start there, because I'll tell you one thing: if they've lied to you, to you about it being heliocentric, sun-centered, and if you can get to that point, going, holy smokes, it's actually geocentric. Things will start changing where you're kind of like, okay, I'm open-minded to maybe start looking into this crazy notion that they might even gone so far as the entire creation and the created order, every single element has been twisted.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true. In the Genesis Paradise Lost film, we present an argument for the Earth being the center. So even if you believe in a spherical Earth, it's possible to believe that we're the center of the universe.
Sure, and I know a lot of people that have come so far where they're just like, hey man, I don't know about that, but I'm geocentric now. I'm 100% convinced biblically. If I take that literal, I start looking into it. Have you ever watched the documentary called The Principle? by
Yes.
Dr. Robert Sugenis, and yeah, we've worked with them actually on. There's clips in there on Scientism Exposed, and if you haven't seen it, or maybe you forget or whatever, it might be something. I'll send you the link again, but like I said, it might be fascinating for you to watch now that we're having this discussion. And then I did the sequel, Scientism Exposed 2, that goes in a little bit even deeper. But both of those might be good. But I'm glad, I'm interested that you're open enough to even have that debate. Even if you get to that point where you're like, nah, I don't buy it, I would love to see a real good, healthy debate, because you might be surprised at how hard it is. I think that's why Kent doesn't want to even touch this with the 10-foot pole. He's got a couple close people that are very close in his life that he literally respects, and they helped him all through prison, and they brought it up, and he's like, get the heck out of here, right? Like he was just like, you know. So these are people
which is
that
funny
he really
coming
respects.
from a guy who, you know, he can see through the evolution lie so clearly. So if it turns out that the Earth really is flat, do you not like that term? Is there a term you prefer?
Oh no. I was just respecting you because you didn't want to really get into it. I was just kind of taking the approach of saying, hey, like, would you be interested in debating cosmology? I was kind of respecting what you had said, that you didn't want to get into politics or talk about flat Earth. So I was just kind of putting that out there. But yeah, I mean, I can definitely say it. The
reason I don't want to talk about it is because I don't come hard down on either side.
Sure.
I would say I don't know. So I don't even know if I could debate in a setting where I'd have to argue for one side, because I
didn't know that you were so open-minded, Shawn. So again, I would never need you to debate that. Just you basically saying what you said. That's fine by me. I mean, I'll let you watch my documentaries. You have questions. If you don't, it's fine by me. I just think that you getting so into the lies of evolution and looking at scientism, I think it's a rabbit trail that you would love to kind of go down and go, how far does this lie go? And again, what are the implications? And you might be amazed at finding out how big, how monstrous it is. Evolution's big enough, but what if the whole thing from the sun, moon, and stars and everything, that whole stuff has all been kept from us, and it opens up a whole new world. I mean, you start reading Genesis, and when it talks about times and seasons and the constellation, all these type of things. The whole fact that there were no such thing as planets, the wandering stars is what they were called. And I mean, look at Genesis when he says, I made the greater light, the lesser light, and stars also. Where's planets in that? You know what I mean? So things just like this, these are the type of things that when you just go right to the Bible and say, okay, I got a major problem here, especially if people are going to start landing on them and doing colonization, and you know what I mean? And it's not mentioned anywhere. And furthermore, in the creation, when you kind of look up in the sky, we kind of see what God said in the first place. He said, we see the moon, we see the sun, and we see what? Stars, right? And again, the question is, well, what's that thing that we've been told is a planet? What if it's the wandering stars? Do a study on the wandering stars. I think it will fascinate you that it's almost like it's interesting.
I think Rob Skiba had some stuff. I've been watching some of his stuff. It's been a while, but yeah, I've seen his presentations on that.
Yeah, like I said, it's fascinating stuff. And again, it comes down to what happens if we were as literal Bible creationists. What if you took a literal interpretation on all creation verses? What would happen? Right. What would happen? Just creation. I'm not like, I agree. People say, well, are you going to take the whole Bible literal? Well, there's parables, there's poetry, but even poetry conveys something. When it says the sun, runs a race like a bridegroom, right? That's conveying that it's moving. It's doing something, right? So I say even poetry conveys truth, but I think when it comes to creation, especially when I'm talking to 6-day literal creationists, why is the firmament not literal, right? When it talks about dividing the waters from the waters, right? And you start getting into the firmament, why then can that not be literal? What's interesting about the firmament, and that's what blew me away, and most people that came to biblical cosmology in this sense looked at the firmament and kind of like, wait a minute, after the flood, there's 3 water sources that get turned off, right? You got the fountains of the deep, which no Christian that I know of that believes in, creationism goes, well, I don't believe in the fountains of the deep. They know there's water down there, right? They all talk about it. So what about the water above? And people say, well, the flood. Remember the canopy theory?
That's right.
But the question is, look at after the flood. There's also verses that talk about water still up there. Right? So what do you do with that after the flood when it's talking about waters are still up there in the heavens, So these are just interesting topics when you start looking at, and it's just fascinating. But no, the only reason I brought it up is I'm just saying what level are you willing to debate or have these talks, because I just think that, you can handle a position, even like what we talked about tonight. Maybe there'll be someone that will say, hey, they'll reach out to me and say, I totally disagree with Shawn with his and I'll pair you guys together to maybe have a debate on your eschatology views, and I think it'd be a fascinating show, especially, the times that we're living. In closing, when it comes to what would you want to say to, fellow believers out there in these times that, everyone's starting to think the worst, or things are getting dark, and maybe you want to maybe speak to people and say, hey, this is what we really need to be doing in these times, even if it's not the end times in the sense of the Great Tribulation, as things progress and we see all this chaos happening, what do you think our response is as believers to the world right now?
Well, Paul definitely said that people will begin to depart from the faith, and we're certainly seeing that. As we progress into a more technological age, we become more self-sufficient, and there's less of a sense of a reliance on God for our daily needs and whatnot. So I would just say, don't allow the world, the state of the world, to take our eyes off of God, off of Christ. Press in, study the scriptures to show ourselves approved, as Paul wrote, and specifically begin to study Paul's writings more carefully again, because I do believe they are our instructions for the present age of grace, and they have everything we need for our instructions in godliness, and so they're very important.
Amen. Well, no, I really appreciate you coming on. Like I said, it's a real honor to have you come on after all these years. You were a huge influence. I mean, God did speak, to me through you. And I know that you were obviously called to ministry, but, I can definitely say, thank you for your service and just being obedient and, obeying that call on your life to come forward. And I know that, it affected a lot of people. I mean, I was already Christian at the time, but you really brought a lot of knowledge, just levels of, looking at debate and just the defense of the Christian faith, right? And you did it with boldness, and you were able to educate a lot of people. And I would imagine that, a lot of people really, they opened the Bible for the first time in their life, through your channel. They're just like, I'm going to look into this.
I'm excited to hear that and glad to hear that, and thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun, and hope we can do it again.
Absolutely. We'll definitely keep it in mind for the future, and we'll stay in touch. I said I'll get some links from you to put in the description, and I'll send you a couple things to look into, but we'll stay in contact, and maybe we'll set up some good times of discussion with other believers, and I think it would be amazing, for the audience and just for people in general. Because I definitely get some panels on board sometimes where we talk about some really great topics, and we talk about pretty much everything, and I think you could lend a lot of great input into pretty much a gamut. I mean, I think you're pretty well versed with so many different topics. I don't think there's too many things that will come up where you haven't really looked into to some extent, right? Maybe not fully, but I think that it will be interesting to see over the years, where God calls you and what you end up doing. But I know that the very beginning of your walk was pretty powerful. I mean, you definitely were called to a huge ministry, YouTube, and you grew very quickly, and you got the attention, or rather I should say, God got the attention through you and was able to, make a lot of these so-called scientists, look really completely not very intelligent, right? I mean, their arguments, I just remember, they never really came back. They just insulted you, And I mean, I'm used to that as well.
Yes, they showed their colors.
Yeah,
they
and that's what we've been used to as well, too. When we bring up certain argumentations, people just want to call us names. It's like, well, listen, let's just have a civilized conversation, and I mean, you shouldn't have a problem with it. If we're just going to go right to the Bible, we're not going to talk about anything else. We're just going to go Bible. Let's see what happens. And you'd be surprised, how many people are scared of doing that. But you aren't. You're willing to get right into the Bible and preach the gospel. And it's amazing getting to know you better, Shawn, and look forward to, getting to know you more here in the future. And we definitely will stay in touch. So thanks, everyone, for tuning in to Celebrate Truth Radio. It's episode 74 with Shawn. The YouTube channel is VenomFangX. The link is in the description, and we'll be adding some more links in there about the stuff we talked in the first hour about Shawn's earlier work, and one in particular that got, it got heads turned quite a bit, and I thought it was really informative, funny, and entertaining, and it showed the creativity and what Shawn probably will be doing in the future as far as honing in on his skills as he's only got better in time. Doing all the editing in the Genesis Paradise Lost, I mean, that was no small feat. If you were the one of the main editors for that that project. There's a lot of work in doing all of that, but we're really blessed and thankful to have Shawn on. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back next time, same place, same time, and we're thankful to have you. So good night, everyone. Blessings. Thanks for staying up late with us. And the 24/7 Flat Earth and the Bible live stream will be up and operational in about 10 minutes. So you can wait around, and in about 10 minutes, the 24/7 stream will be streaming with so much great content, and you don't want to miss it all if you haven't been there. Mods, thanks again for all your help, and we'll talk to you again soon. All right? Thanks, everyone. Good night.